Rewind of the Living Dead is a review show, so spoilers are ahead.
When 2023 began, we were immediately greeted by a dancing doll armed with artificial intelligence named Megan. And by March, we were once again being stalked by Ghostface, but this time in the streets of New York City. In April, the Deadites returned for a blood-soaked trip through Los Angeles. And by July, we were all dancing to Australian hip-hop and wondering if grabbing onto a severed and embalmed hand and saying "talk to me" would allow us to see the dead. September came with a familiar puppet asking if we wanted to play a game. In October, the power of Christ compelled us once again, and in November, we were promised there would be no leftovers after Thanksgiving. In the latest episode of Rewind of the Living Dead, we're going to look back at the best and worst from the horror film industry in 2023 and reveal our picks for the top 5 horror movies of the year. Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I am Damon Martin.
And I'm Patrick Guerra.
And Patrick, it has come once again time to talk about the best and worst of the horror film industry for 2023. It is our best of episode. We like to close out every year with our favorite horror films, and we've kind of switched up the way we've done these last couple years where we actually started injecting our categories. We're going to be giving away some awards. We're going to be nominating and talking about some of the best performances. And of course, we're going to give our picks for the top 5 horror movies of 2023. Had a little fun with our intro there. I hope you enjoyed that. I had some fun writing the all the months into the year of the big movies.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting year in horror, and I got to start things off right here. And I didn't realize this until I was writing our intro. And I guess you could argue this is a lot of years, but it really did feel like this was a year where a lot of franchises either returned or were reinvigorated or restarted, because like Evil Dead hadn't had a movie in a long time. Saw had kind of petered away with the whole Chris Rock movie, the Spiral movie, and Scream, back strong for another year, which we'll talk about that film at some point today. It was an interesting year.
The Nun was back.
The Exorcist, of course, which we'll
get. The Exorcist. Oh yeah.
A lot of franchises this year and a lot of new movies. I probably say this at the start of every best of podcast. It was an interesting year.
It was an interesting year, but I think what was most interesting for me was how different this year was than 2022. I listened back to some of our podcasts for our best of 2022. And Damon, we were on record as saying it might have been one of the best years in horror ever. We really just got a lot of great new stuff, a lot of great franchise returns. I think the original work last year was like really, really strong. Not that it wasn't this year, but something just felt different this year for me, Damon. I'll give you some stats from my end of things. I watched, as of this recording, I watched 130 movies, and 82 of them were horror movies. So that's plenty of horror movies. That's more than one a week. So I'm actually up on pace for how many horror movies I've watched. But truth be told, Damon, I was less bowled over by horror movies this year. That's not to say like, oh, horror's in trouble. There's no panic on my breath. Don't take it that way. But the last year I didn't know what to do when it came around to top 5. This year I wasn't sure. I was like adding films that I probably, when I watched them, was like, well, it's not going to make my top 5 this year, but it was like on my list of potential top 5 movies. And I was like, wow, like this year is kind of thinner for great horror movies than last year. But maybe last year's an unfair comparison, Damon, because last year was simply one of the best.
Yeah, it's weird because last year I really had to think about how I was going to rank my top 5. I had a pretty good idea what was number 1. That stayed consistent pretty much throughout the entire year. My number 1 last year was Fresh. That one came out, I think, in February, if I'm not mistaken. So that one survived at the top of my list for 9 months, 10 months. when it came out. So that one was there. But then, I had films like Speak No Evil, and there were just a lot of other films that were kind of peppered in there that made it hard to really narrow it down to 5 films. I will be honest with you, not to bury the lead on when we reveal our top 5 movies later. I had 6 this year that could have been in the top 5. There's one I left out that I'm going to talk about when we talk about honorable mentions, and I kind of feel bad leaving it out in a way, but that was pretty much my number. I didn't really have to struggle, and I'll be honest, my drop from number 1 to number 2 is kind of precipitous. Like, it wasn't an argument in my head. Now, last year I was pretty confident in my number 1, but there were a couple contenders that were like vying throughout the year that were pretty strong as well. This year, not so much. This year, my number 1 stayed consistent with me, number 1 for most of the year. And I would say number 2, while I certainly enjoyed number 2, I enjoyed all 5 films that I have on my list. I would say the drop off was much steeper this year. And then what I noticed now, I need to do this next year. You got me on track of jotting down every movie I watched throughout the year. I got to keep better track of that. I don't know the total number of horror films. I did go through all my streaming services and look at my watched list, and I started compiling a list. So I don't think I reached 80. I think I got somewhere around like the 60 mark, 60 or 50, 60 or 70 mark maybe. Here's what I noticed in a lot of horror, and I don't want to start off our best of episode on kind of like a negative tone, but here's what I would say. A lot of the horror I watch, new horror. We're going to talk about Best Missed later in the show, a film that we didn't see till this year that was out prior to 2023. What I noticed about 2023 is that I wouldn't necessarily say the horror films were bad or were poor. I would say my overall opinion in general for the whole year was a lot of mediocrity. Like, not bad, but not good. Like, no, a lot of the films that I was like, oh, I kind of forgot I saw that.
Yeah.
We're almost like, and I went back and looked at every film we reviewed this year, all the new films particularly, and I was like, yeah, that was okay, or that was decent, or that was pretty good, but not a lot of standout. And I think that's kind of where I landed when I was doing my list and putting things together this year. It was just a lot of good, decent films, but nothing that, not a lot of films that really blew me away.
Yeah, I think you're right in that. I think the subversion of expectations was what made 2022 so exciting. Is that there a lot of movies just flat out surprised us. We'll talk about Speak No Evil, which I think was my number 2 movie on both my horror and my regular list of best movies of the year. A movie you just did not see coming. Like it has subverted every possible expectation of the horror genre. And then my number 1 of the year was Smile last year. That one was much more traditional, and it's like I had seen it before, but the scares in it and the way the darkness of it subverted a lot of my expectations, where I think a lot of movies that you could compare Smile to hadn't done in the past for me. This year, there were a lot of movies, just like you're saying, I go, oh yeah, I saw that. And I remember just thinking, that's about right down the middle. It didn't surprise me. It didn't scare me. It didn't subvert any sort of expectations. So you come away from this year going, well, cool, I saw 82 horror movies in my case. I'm glad I got to see 82 horror movies, but I didn't see a ton of horror movies that were like, holy shit, I've never seen this before, until we get into my top 2, which were actually for me very difficult to choose between the top 2. It was really hard because I think the top 2 movies for me this year were easily, by far and away, the 2 best horror movies that I saw all year long, and I saw a lot of stuff. So yeah, it's more of that. And there's movies, Damon, that won't even crest my top 10, my honorable mentions, that a lot of people were talking about and anticipating. And I'm not going to slam them or drag them here, but when I watched them, or I got to see them early because I went to South by Southwest and saw a lot of horror there, I was just like, like I've seen it before. There wasn't a reinvention in a lot of places this year. There wasn't a lot of reinvention of the genre. It felt sort of like a rehash.
Yeah, I'll say this, and I know this is going to sound like a backhanded compliment. I feel like there were a lot of B minus films this year. If we were putting grades on them, you know what I mean? Like B minus,
Sure.
bad.
It's
That's not
not. It's
that's
not
not a
bad.
bad grade. But when you talk about the best of the best, you want A's and you want A pluses. You know what I mean? And I think there was a lot of B minus, C plus films this year, and I think that's really kind of what I came away from it with. Is like they were good or they were decent. They were not films that I'm just like revolting against. Where I would just it wasn't Halloween Ends where I'm like I never want to see this again, and I'd rather get stabbed in the eyes than watch this. There wasn't a lot of that, but
Yeah.
there was a lot of like, yeah, I saw it. Yeah, it was,
Yeah.
and that's again, I think that's just the general consensus for the whole year. Now, were there some standout films when we get to our top five? Absolutely. There were a couple of really good standout films, a couple of franchises that surprised me this year, that genuinely
Hmm.
surprised me this year. A couple letdowns in that category as well. But there were some original fun films. And yeah, like I said, this was just an odd year because last year there were two or three movies that I could honestly say will probably end up if I had to if force me to nail down and say name your top 100 horror films of all time. There were a couple three candidates last year that I'd say, oh, absolutely, they're going to make that list. This year there was probably one that really stood out to me as like head and shoulders above the rest of the crowd. And then there were a couple that were pretty good, and then there were a couple that were they were good, and I enjoyed them. But it was a harder year to rank. It was an easier year to rank than it was last year. Last year I really struggled. This year I didn't struggle as much. Actually, what I struggled with was coming up with a full. Like I think I listed 12 total movies that were in contention, and I eliminated like five pretty quickly. Like
Right.
that just wouldn't make the mark for me as far as like best. Uh,
Right.
and then when I got down to the six, I really did get conflicted about one particular choice. And then the other five, it was just more about ranking. And number one was pretty solid. Number two through five was like, okay, I could kind of flip flop here and there. And I did flip flop a couple of them. But it was, the thing is I will say this when we talk about like kind of putting a negative spin on the year, and I promise I'm not trying to do that. I will say this the horror industry as a whole is healthier than it's ever been coming out of the pandemic because the horror film industry became arguably outside of a couple of blockbusters like Barbie this year and Oppenheimer and a couple others. Horror for the last couple of years really has been a savior to the movie theater industry because horror films suddenly started overperforming at movie theaters more than some comic book movies. Like Marvel's had a terrible year. Like Marvel has not had a good year at all, which that was like, they were you could literally print money at the freaking box office every time they put a movie out. Now people are like, I'm kind of
Yeah.
not really into Marvel anymore. Horror movies come out, the word, when Barbarian came out, the word of mouth buzzed with that movie, blew it up. Smile came out, blew it up, word of mouth. When Exorcist comes out now and it's number one at the box office, or Five Nights at Freddy's, which we were not fans of, but when it came out, boy, did it do gangbusters first weekend at the box office and continues to, have some big moments on streaming and things like that. That's what I'm talking about. Whether I love it or I'm, kind of middle of the road with it, horror has continued to find momentum and build momentum over these last few years coming out of the pandemic. And that I love. Whether I'm a massive fan of Five Nights at Freddy's doesn't diminish the millions of people who paid and wanted to see that movie and enjoyed it. I always say, whether I love or hate a movie, go see it and judge for yourself. But that part, whether I like or dislike a movie like Five Nights at Freddy's, the fact that it did so well is good. That's good for the horror film industry.
Absolutely. Last year, Smile was the highest grossing original idea in all of box office at all, period. So all the other ones were existing IP, the Mission Impossibles, the Marvel stuff, the DC stuff. This was like last year, Smile was the original thing that made the most money at the box office, and horror continues that trend this year. Still making good money at the box office. Yeah, I didn't love Five Nights at Freddy's. I want it to do great, and every year I want more Five Nights at Freddy's costumes for the kids and all that stuff. It's just good for us. It's good for us that horror stays up in the higher ranks of the box office, because that means we get more of it. And the sensibilities of moviegoers has changed. I see now our YouTube comments and our comments on Instagram. Like, people have a lot to say about the movies that are out. Like, the fact it's not like in I think with in the 1980s, when there was sort of this oversaturation of horror, they're also, the audiences weren't as sophisticated back then. They were like, I don't know, just show me, blood, guts, and boobs. That should work. Now, like, they want the nuance. They want the storytelling. It's all going to be there. So so we have leveled up as a genre, and I think we're just going to continue to get more and more great horror films that will be talked about, for horror history, which is great. I mean, I it's an embarrassment of riches. 82 horror movies I saw this year, Damon. Almost 100 horror movies I got to see this year. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
That's what I want out of my life.
Yeah, and I also say, I want to throw this out there. One other thing, I think what I appreciate about horror in 2023 is that I think the movie industry as a whole, and the audience going movie industry as a whole, has learned to judge horror and the success of horror on a different level than what it used to be judged on. When Friday the 13th was churning out a movie every single year, that was a guaranteed box office for that studio, for New Line Cinema. Same thing with Nightmare on Elm Street. When they were doing franchise, they were rolling them out. Now, did the product get diminished because they were just chucking them out there year after year and just basically throwing anything at the canvas in hopes that it would stick? Yes, and that did hurt. And that's why in the 90s, from 90 to 95, horror really suffered. It was a struggle for horror to survive during that time. And then Scream came out in 96, reinvented the genre, and horror movies took off again. Then we had the 2000s, where kind of things were back in the mud a little bit, and then we picked it back up, and these last few years have been arguably maybe the best years for horror in the movie theater industry since the 80s.
Yeah.
Here's what I'll say, though, is that I think where I talk about horror as being judged differently is that I think Terrifier 2 was a great example of that. Terrifier 2 made about $16 million at the box office. That's really not that much money when you think about, a Marvel film or Barbie earning $1 billion. That's peanuts compared to that. But what I appreciate is that a film like Terrifier 2, and I know this is going back to last year, they had a $250,000 budget.
I think Terrifier 2 was like 800,000, but still.
No, it was 250,000. That's what it was. It was.
I heard some different things in some back channels that weren't maybe posted publicly.
That's what Damien Leone said publicly. 250. The first one was made for $50,000. The second one was made for $250,000. Anyways, it was 100. It was $800,000. Doesn't matter. The point
it's still,
it 16 times its budget. And I think that's what people are starting to judge it for. We're no longer saying, oh, it wasn't a $500 million movie. Look at Scream 6 that came out this year. Scream 6 made, I think, like $150 million at the movie theater or whatever, and I think it was on like a $15 million budget or $10 million budget, something like that. It was very low. Mm-hmm. You're making 10 times. And I think people are starting to finally appreciate that just not only earning back your budget, but making 10 times as much is a win. That's a win. You know what I mean?
Horror's a good investment, yeah.
Yeah, like Oppenheimer made a lot of money, but they also spent $200 million making that movie or whatever ridiculous amount of money it was. You know what I mean? Like, that's like, it's being judged differently now. Like, that's why when I say Marvel's had a down year, that's why, because you spend $150 million making the Marvels and it only makes $100 million at the box office. That's a massive loss. That's a huge loss, $50 million. That's why I say that when like a film like Evil Dead Rise or Five Nights at Freddy's or The Exorcist Believer or whatever, they open number one and they earn a pretty good chunk of the box office and they make back their budget and then some. I think the film industry as a whole has not only started to embrace horror more, but they've embraced the profitability. Mm-hmm. Yes, you're not going to drop. There's no way you're going to drop Five Nights at Freddy's and it's going to make $200 million or $100 million on opening weekend or whatever it is. It's not going to be that. It's not going to be Barbie. But if you spend $15 million to make it and it ends up making $85 million at the box office, you've made 5 times as much as your budget. 6 times as much of your budget. That's a huge win. I think that is where horror is finally being judged differently and being judged properly, in my opinion, because horror films don't get these massive, inflated, bloviated budgets. A horror film getting a $10 million budget is a pretty big deal. Like, that's a pretty
Right.
remarkable accomplishment to get a $10 or $15 million budget on a horror film. Most of them have peanuts compared to that. But then you go out and do what Terrifier did, or you go out and do what Talk to Me did. This Talk to Me is, probably the biggest case scenario. I can't remember how much the Philippou brothers had for that film,
I
but
think it was around 4 million, I think.
yeah. And what did it make at the box office?
A couple 100 million. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean
So
that's what I'm talking. And I think that is where people like will Talk to Me end up on the top 10 highest grossing films of 2023? Probably not, because it's not Barbie, it's not Oppenheimer, it's not, one of those films. But studios and executives are starting to realize that if I can put together a pretty good horror film and the word of mouth and the buzz is going to get going, I can take a $10 million budget and turn that into a $100 million film or a $90 million film, and I've just made back 9 times my money on a film like that. And that says a lot about that. And again, horror film directors have been picked up and moved on to other genres and made successful films that way. So I think if I want to applaud the horror industry on one major thing, that's the biggest, is that I think the film industry as a whole has started to really embrace horror and realize that, yes, Scream 6 or Scream whatever number is not going to beat out Barbie at the box office. But if you can put a $15 million budget and it makes $150 million, you've now made 10 times as much money back as you invested in this movie. That's a win. That's a win.
it changes the reputation. We are no longer the reputation as the B movie genre, the genre you wave aside. At some point down the road, Damon, they're going to get to the point where there are going to be horror movies consistently getting awards talk. Like, that's eventually going to happen. Now, that's its own subset of horror itself, right? Like the awards type movies, but they're out there and they exist. Especially as genres, what I've noticed overall for movies in 2023 is that genres are starting to blur, and horror has been blurring genres from the get-go. It's been murder mystery, drama, comedy, all indie, experimental art. We've been doing it in horror, but now all the other genres are catching up and going, yeah, we kind of need to blend everything. We kind of need to be a comedy, a drama, even a little bit of horror. We'll talk about that. I actually have some movies that fill that particular need. But no longer is horror going to be looked at as sort of just the afterthought of the business. Horror is a moneymaker. It is one of the few moneymakers in the business in this world of streaming these days. So, congrats to us, Damon, really, honestly.
Yeah, we're a huge part in that. Also, to get my numbers correct, I just looked it up to be sure. Scream 6 cost around $33 million to make, so it's a higher budget, but it made $170 million at the box office. That's still a massive win. Like,
that's a big studio movie too. It's owned by a studio, so that's it's not a crazy thing to put. It's still a low budget actually for a studio.
Oh, what very low budget, and it still made 4 times its money back. Like, it still made 4 times and 5 times as much money as what they put into investment. So,
and I'm looking at Talk to Me here, $4.5 million budget, and it grossed $91 million worldwide. So, that's huge. That's 20 times.
Yeah, that's insane. There's a reason why they greenlit a sequel like immediately. Like, yeah, we need more of this. I think
A24 is like, hey, cool, we just made a bunch of fucking money. That's great. Yeah. Which A24 was not known as a money-making studio, and now they are, to the point, and I'm not saying like Talk to Me was the only reason, but it's a big reason why A24 was like, we're going to start making like big action movies too. Like, we're going to be able to make everything because we make money on these horror movies.
Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about. Is, like I said, studios for a long time, it became all about the blockbuster. And I get that, it did. But then the pandemic happened and no one could go to the movie theater, and they had to find other outlets to release movies and get people interested. And horror kind of took over during that time. Horror kind of, there were still lower budget horror movies. And then when people started quietly filtering back into into theaters, They were like, oh, I'll go see Barbarian. I'll go see this. I'll see that. And people started to realize, hey, a $20 million budget that makes $100 million, like, yeah, it's not making $1 billion, but that's still 5 times profit. If we put out 10 of those a year, guess what? We've now matched what a big Marvel movie would have done, or a big DC movie would have done. Or, you look at like The Flash, which was terrible. That movie was awful. And they put, $250 million or whatever. I don't have the numbers in front of me what it made, but even if it made $400 million, it's still ultimately going to end up being a loss because all the money you put into marketing and all that kind of stuff, it just ends up being where you're breaking even, or at the end of the day, maybe you make $50 million. But guess what? A24 just made double that would Talk to Me on a $4 million budget. And that's where I'm talking. I think these A24 is a little different because they're an indie studio anyways. They're not a big, they're not Sony or Warner Bros.
Not yet, they aren't.
But that's what I'm getting at here. And that's, again, even though I'm a little down on the quality of horror films this year, saying there weren't as many just number one A+ movies for me, I still applaud the horror film industry as a whole, because we're still holding tight. We're still putting out quality enough projects that people are willing to spend their money to go to the movie theater and see it. And you can take a $10 or $15 million budget and turn it into a $100 million movie.
And thank you to the fans out there, not just the fans of this show, which we worship you and love you because you keep us going every week, but just the fans of horror in general for showing up and continually proving that we're a genre that will never go anywhere.
Absolutely. So with that being said, it is finally time to start getting into our best of 2023. In a weird way, though, we're actually going to travel briefly back to 2022. And our first category this week is just kind of closing out the year. Last year, coming into 2023, you and I named our 2 most highly anticipated films of 2023. And then, obviously, the year came out. We are now at the end of the year. We wanted to kind of react and give our opinions on how those 2 films turned out once we actually saw them. So I'll allow you to go first. I'll name your films. I know you've got mine, so I'll kind of start here. Your most anticipated movies coming into 2023 were, if I'm getting this correctly, Evil Dead Rise, and The Exorcist Believer. Those are the 2 films that were your most anticipated coming into 2023. How'd they do?
Well, it's a mixed bag, isn't it? Evil Dead Rise came, and I was very excited to see what it was all about. I will say this: I think it kicked ass. I think it was a great addition to the genre, to the franchise. Excuse me. And I was very curious to see, because I knew it wasn't going to be a Fede Alvarez sequel. It was going to be something completely different. And we might even be talking about Evil Dead Rise a little bit later in the show. So I won't spend too much hot air on it here. But I will say, as far as anticipation goes, yeah, that one lived up to the hype. Exorcist Believer, again, we'll be talking about that later in the show. So I won't get too much into it here. But again, but I will say this, and it's something about our extended intro there. We were talking about a lot of C+, C+ movies this year. Exorcist Believer kind of fell into that range for me, as like, oh, this is a movie. So yeah, we'll talk about those ones later, Damon. But your most anticipated of 2023 were, if I'm not mistaken, Scream 6, aka Ghostface Takes Manhattan, and a movie Sick, which was actually a rather small release, but it was co-written by Kevin Williamson. So how did those movies go for you as far as your anticipated movies of 2023?
And for the people that don't know the name specifically, Kevin Williamson is the guy who wrote the original Scream. He created Scream and Scream 2. He's the original writer behind those, so that's where it came from. I would say I had better luck with my most anticipated movies than you did, Patrick, because Scream 6 exceeded my expectations, I'll be honest, because Scream 5, I really did enjoy it, but I still had some issues with it. I think Scream 6 surpassed it. I think the change in venue and genre, and the switch in locations, and kind of moving into this new age of Scream characters, moving beyond everyone who was in the original Scream, the original first Scream film, was a good idea, even though I disagreed with not paying Neve Campbell her money. I think that one exceeded, and I feel like I'm going to be talking about Scream 6 a little later as well, not to bury the lead in what's happening this year. I would say Sick was fun. It was a perfectly fine slasher film. Didn't blow me away, didn't disappoint me necessarily. We reviewed it, so you can go listen to that podcast last year. I enjoyed it. That's a film that I would say fell into that like B minus range for me. It was good. It wasn't great. Didn't blow me away. Isn't a film that I'm really rushing to revisit. But again, B minus still isn't that bad. Like it's not terrible by any stretch of the imagination. There's a lot of films I watched this year and reviewed this year that I never want to see again. I wouldn't put Sick in that category. It was fine. Like I don't understand. Here's my biggest qualm coming out of that one is like I don't understand how Kevin Williamson doesn't have more stuff. Like he's such a I don't know, did he piss off somebody or something? Like, I don't know why this guy isn't writing more films because he's still pretty good at his job. Like, he had no budget and basically a cast of like 4 people in that movie Sick, and it was pretty decent. Like, it was all right, you know? So I don't know what he did. I don't know why he's not getting more jobs in Hollywood as a screenwriter. I have no idea why, but yeah, it was decent.
I mean, he does have that old school Scream money, so he probably doesn't work as much as I'm just totally guessing here that he's like, I don't need to work, and if a bug is under my ass, I'll go write something.
Yeah, that could be true too. He may just like I'm just writing for me these days. Like I'm not writing for anybody but myself. So maybe that's it. I don't know. I'm genuinely.
Maybe. I mean, he had a hell of a run for about 10 years,
Oh,
like a hell of a run.
Scream. I know what you did last summer. The Faculty. Like he was on a run there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
These are evergreen movies that.
let's not forget he did Dawson's Creek. Like that's his show. Like that's
Yeah, all these things were very good for him. So excuse him if he's just lounging on the deck watching the birds go by, because I don't think he needs to bend over backwards to write stuff these
he
days.
might be lighting his cigar with $100 bill right now, laughing at us, being like, "Ha ha ha! These assholes think I'm out of work or something right now."
Yeah, he might, for all I know.
Yeah. So let's get into our first category. We're going to kick things off with our best of, like we do with every one of our categories during the show. We're going to give our Oscar award, so to speak, our rewindy, if our rewards are called something here. We're going to give our rewindy. I just named that right here on the spot, by the way. I didn't make that up before the show. We're going to give our first award to Best Performance for 2023. So, Patrick, I'll turn it to you first. Who was your best performance in horror in 2023?
Shall I read off the nominees? Or
Feel
did you
free.
have any extra nominees besides the ones I gave you in the email?
I probably had a couple other ones, but I'm not overly concerned about that. So you name off the ones you had on there, and then tell me who got number one.
So my nominees were Dave Bautista for Knock at the Cabin, Mia Goth for Infinity Pool, Alyssa Sutherland for Evil Dead Rise, Nicolas Cage for Renfield, Sophie Wilde for Talk to Me, and Tobin Bell for Saw X. And my winner of the 2023 Best Performance goes to Mia Goth for Infinity Pool. Now, if that name sounds familiar, well, she just might be the queen of horror right now. And she won your best performance last year for 2022. Mia Goth in Infinity Pool this year was as villainous and scary as anybody could ever be she wasn't like a killer. I mean, she was, but it wasn't like in any traditional sense. She was just somebody who goes on vacation and does real fucked up shit on her vacations because she can. And Mia Goth is, I think, one of the most tremendous actors working right now, and it really showed off in Infinity Pool. And I think she made the movie memorable for me. And that's kind of how I've been judging my best performances overall for the year is who made that movie unforgettable. And it certainly for me was Mia Goth.
So, to be clear, you and I do not discuss these categories beforehand. We have no
No.
idea what we're going to pick. It's kind of part of the fun of doing these best of podcasts because we get to be surprised by our own selections, which, makes it fun for the podcast. Had no idea you were going Mia Goth because my best performance in 2023 also goes to the fantastic performance by Mia Goth in Infinity Pool. She was also she was number one last year. She was my best performance in 2022. She is now also my best performance in 2023. Not because there weren't other good performances. There were a lot of new people that I see. Sophie Wilde, you mentioned, of course, and Talk to Me was somebody I'd never heard of before seeing that film. She did a fantastic job in that movie, which I enjoyed so much. As you mentioned, Alyssa Sutherland did a great job in that film, in Evil Dead Rise. There were a lot of good performances this year. That, again, even though I was a little down on horror overall, I would even argue Kiernan Shipka in Totally Killer was a lot of fun for a horror comedy. There
Yeah.
were a lot of solid performances. But
You
me,
could have said Justin Long for "It's a Wonderful Knife." Too bad the movie was not "It's a Wonderful."
I'd rather take a knife to the throat than say that. Yeah, I would say Mia Goth continues to steal the show, and obviously, listen, we may very well be mentioning her again in 2024 because
She's got
Maxine
Maxine. Yeah.
is coming out next year, and that is the third film in the trilogy of Ty West from X to Pearl and now Maxine. She's just incredible, and here's what I love about Mia Goth from last year to this year, and this is a weird comparison and a weird analogy to make. She reminds me so much of like a modern age 2023 Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
He takes immeasurable chances and continues to hit. Now, I will say this for Nicolas Cage, he takes a lot of chances, doesn't always land. But I appreciate that he just goes for it. Like it or not, he goes for it. And I think that's what Mia Goth does so well. When she's barking at Alexander Skarsgård's character when he's on a bus trying to escape this hellacious vacation he's been trapped on, and Mia Goth is in a car with all of her other rich pals taunting him from outside the car saying, "Where are you going, James?" And it's just so over the top that I absolutely adored that performance. And again, I can't say, will Mia Goth maybe take a chance somewhere down the road and miss? It's possible.
Sure.
She's going to do a big Marvel movie with Blade. Maybe that will just, maybe they'll try to rein her in and it won't be as good of a, I have no idea. But her chances, it's like she's playing blackjack and she just keeps getting a 21 every single time.
Yeah.
She was that good in Infinity Pool.
She was. I mean, really. I mean, for a movie that that might have kind of gone off our radar, it hinges. I actually really liked Infinity Pool. Truth be told, like it, but you're right. You fucking nailed it. It is a very Nick Cage performance where it's like this is borderline unhinged. This is borderline one testicle award, but it works really really well.
Like it's just somehow like she just continues to pull it off, and even when if you go one or 2 or 3 feet further to the right, it goes completely off the rails. It goes full on testicle. But then you get Pig, where it's just like this brilliant performance. Mia Goth just continues to pull him out. So 2 years in a row, not by planning, by the way. I had no idea I was going to pick her a second year in a row, but she gets the rewindy for best performance in 2023 as well. And from both of us, again,
totally unplanned. Yes, to reiterate, we do not share our picks ahead of time. This is all we're going in blind, folks.
Yeah. So let's talk about the best franchise, because I mentioned earlier that a big part of horror in 2023 were a lot of franchises kind of being reinvented or reinvigorated. And dormant franchises at that. Evil Dead is a great example of that. There are not really, I mean, there had been, obviously, Fede Alvarez's film came out, was it 2013?
Yeah.
So it's been 10 years, but I'm talking about like tying back to even Army of Darkness, which was, early 90s. So that film was reinvigorated. Of course, we also had Scream, which had been around. They reinvigorated that with Scream 5. That was the first one back in a decade. We also had The Exorcist, which The Exorcist has not necessarily stopped making films. I would argue they probably stopped making good Exorcist films once Exorcist 3 was over. But The Exorcist came back to life, and that was such a big marquee moment this year, especially bringing back actors from the original film and everything. So, Patrick, for you, what was the best franchise in 2023?
I ultimately went with one of the more dormant franchises. I went with the Evil Dead franchise. I thought Evil Dead Rise was a rather great addition. Like, you talk about Fede Alvarez's version of Evil Dead, which some could argue, I think maybe we did figure out that it is indeed in the actual Ash timeline. It exists in the Ash timeline, I think.
I think we did, yeah. I think they mentioned that, like they were talking about doing it, adding it into the whole thing. So yes.
Yeah, this movie now diverts entirely away from any of that. They changed the venue. They changed it to a high rise in Los Angeles with all new characters and all new Deadites. And I was very pleasantly surprised because it felt fresh and new, much like Scream. When Scream introduced like a whole cast of new characters, you sort of get the idea that like this franchise can really live on and have a ton of potential going forward.
I would totally agree, and this one nearly got my pick as well. Again, totally unplanned. This one's almost mine. Like, damn, are we gonna have the same pick on every category? This one almost landed top for me, and here's my reason why. I've never been a massive Evil Dead fan. I said this when we did the review for this, and we did Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead. I've said multiple, and even though I can say now honestly, I love Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead, and I really loved Evil Dead Rise. I was not the Evil Dead kid. I didn't grow up being like, oh, I love Bruce Campbell. I love
Yeah.
those movies. I've said many times the films that are so kind of goofy that they become comedy when they're not really supposed to be comedy don't really land with me that often. So I'm not like a massive Evil Dead franchise fan, but I would say this one really surprised me this year. So that I would agree. That was a big win. For me, my best franchise, and I know it's going to be generic, and I know a lot of people are going to say, I saw this coming. But my best franchise was Scream. And the reason I gave it to Scream this year was one big reason. It's because Scream 6 ended up being a better film than Scream 5. Now, again, to be clear, I liked Scream 5. I had flaws with Scream 5, but I still really enjoyed it. I was so happy to be in the movie theater watching that film, and I saw it a couple times in the movie theater. Scream 6 surpassed that. And the magic trick they pulled with that film, which I kind of mentioned earlier, even though I hate what they did to Neve Campbell, that they didn't want to pay her, and so that's the reason she didn't come back, they finally moved the franchise forward. And I love the twists and turns in that movie, that they went away from it's all about Sydney and Woodsboro, and they moved it on to this next generation of characters. And I loved that. And I loved that they made it interesting. It was fun. It was brutal. Some of the most brutal kills in that entire franchise history. And once again, I say this as an adoring, lifelong, you can see it behind me, lifelong Nightmare on Elm Street fan, which I always still call my favorite franchise. But Scream is the most consistent franchise. There's yet to be everyone hates Scream 3. I still think it's a pretty good movie. I still enjoy Scream 3. It is the most consistent horror franchise in history, but there's not one bad Scream. There are bad Nightmare on Elm Street films.
Oh yes.
There are bad Halloween films. There's not a bad Scream film. And the fact that they are now in part 6 that came out this year and it was still really good blows me away.
But there's also not any bad Leprechaun films because they're all bad.
Yeah, they're all terrible.
It's just there's no bad one. They're all that's the setting that they're at. So,
But
let's be fair to Leprechaun.
That's true. Thank you, Leprechaun, for your consistency. We appreciate that. But no, again, the consistency, that's what I'm saying. Like, do you realize how hard it is not only to get to 6 films, but make 6 films that are like totally watchable?
No, they are, and I had fun. And I've never been a big Scream guy. Truth be told, I don't think I saw any of the Scream movies. Man, that's not true. But I think I may have saw Scream 2 in the theaters. But it's not a franchise that I've latched onto, but I've never been disappointed by it.
Yeah.
Ever. And I really had fun at the movies this year with Scream 6. It was just good old fashioned horror fun, even though I think some people complained that it was like the most serious Scream of all. I was like, good. It could be fucking serious sometimes. That's not a big deal. Let it be serious. It was good. I like the new cast. I have a feeling we might be talking more about that later. I won't predict the future, but another franchise where it's like, oh, it can live beyond its original roots. This thing can keep going. It's a completely functional franchise without ever having to pull back on any of its old stories.
It's a magic trick to go this long and not make a bad one. Honestly, it really is like befuddling to me how they did it. For 6 films, all of them have been pretty at worst pretty good. That's right. That's an achievement, man. Because I cannot say that about any other horror franchise out there. All right, let's talk about best kill. There were in horror, safe to say, a lot of kills this year. Narrowing it down to one. Patrick, what was your best? I swear to God, you're going to pick the same one as me. I can already tell it.
You can feel it.
What is your number one best kill of 2023 in horror?
Well, I could not get over, and I think probably most days at some point during the day, I wake up and I think about little Santino from When Evil Lurks and his lifeless flopping head as his mother walks down the street maniacally feasting upon his brains. That kill from When Evil Lurks sticks in my craw, Damon, in a way that few can. So, yes, I'm going with Little Santino being eaten in When Evil Lurks.
So we didn't do a category of most disturbing moment of the year, or I think that probably would have taken the cake. Uh, that scene was so utterly wrong,
So
amazing.
fucked up.
It's so wild. The dude is driving in the car and he just finds his sister-in-law and she's munching on her own child's head like it's candy out of a bucket on Halloween. Yeah, that was unbelievably disturbing. But we didn't pick the same one. I'm very surprised.
I want to hear what yours is.
We did pick the same movie, however.
Oh, nice.
My best kill of 2023 was the little girl and the dog from When Evil Lurks. That was also one of the best shocking moments of 2023. We didn't put
Yeah.
best scare necessarily in this best of category, but the moment when that dog latches onto that little girl and runs off with her body just flopping as he runs off with her. I've said it I know people get sick of me saying this. Even though when I can see things coming, if you do it right, it still works. And I knew something was happening with that dog, but the surprise of it just literally chomping down on a child
Yeah.
blew me away. I was like, holy shit, I can't believe they did this.
And then the ragdolling too. It's like, okay, the initial jump where he lunges at her was kind of fucked up, but you would assume in most movies that they're going to kind of cut away and you barely see anything. No, this was like Damien Rugner was like, no, let's keep going on this. Like, what would a dog do? He'd lash it around a little bit, so you see this girl like just thrashing in this dog's mouth, and then he runs off, dragging her along, and runs off out into the streets, and you're like, the fuck did I just watch?
Yeah.
What the fuck was that? Like it was literally just like it left you in a state of shock. And I feel like both our best kills are that. They just sort of stunned me in a way that I don't think any other movie was able to do this year.
Yeah, that one, when I sat in the theater when it happened, I was like, I cannot believe you just did this. I cannot believe you just had this happen. And that one shocked me and continues to shock me throughout the entire year. So When Evil Lurks, you produced the best kills, both for you and I. We're both When Evil Lurks. So kudos to Damien Rugner for pulling that one off.
Yeah, man, what a fucking movie.
Let's talk about best gore. It wouldn't be a year in horror without gore, Patrick, and we did have some spectacular gore this year. We really, really did. The people who were doing effects should all get a standing ovation. It was a good year. So, for you, Patrick, what was your best gore in 2023?
This was a tougher category. I had to kind of really search through my database and think about what stuck out to me. But when it hit me, I go, yeah, there's nothing that got me quite like the razor wire to the thigh in Saw X. So Jigsaw puts all these people in this giant factory room and decides like you're all gonna have to like do something awful to yourselves in front of all of each of you. You're gonna all have to witness it. And I think it was the first one, right? I think it was the first one in that grouping.
Yeah.
And she had to take this razor sharp razor wire and literally just hand saw her thighs off. And they don't, I mean, credit to the filmmakers for just leaving the camera on while she chews through fat and meat and bone and gore spilling out, and then she has to attach the hose and suck the marrow out of the bone. If it sounds disgusting, it's because it is, folks. If you haven't seen Saw X, the gore is incredible. And that scene in particular, I was just like, fuck me, man. What a thing of beauty. You know I'm a gore whore, Damon. Like, I fucking loved it.
What I love about that scene is they know it's uncomfortable, they know it lasts too long, and yet
Too long.
still continues. It is like It is like a car crash in slow motion. We all
Oh,
stop and look at a car crash, but you know it's going to be over in 2 seconds. This is like a car crash that just continues to happen and happen more and continues to happen until she literally saws off her own leg. And you watch it flop on the floor. And oh, by the way, it's not over yet because she's still got to suck a vacuum into her leg and take out the bone marrow to try to save her own life. It is unreal. It is a really uncomfortable yet amazing scene.
and gorgeous special effects. I should have pulled up the name of the people in the special effects team, but kudos to them because I mean it looked as real as it gets. I mean that drip machine part where the blood will go through the sieve or whatever it is, the sieve, but the marrow is thick and more coagulated and fatty, and it will stop in there. And I was just like, God, the attention to detail, just my hat's off to you. So fucking good.
Yeah, it was great. I had a couple of candidates for my best score this year, and I'll be honest, I think about four of them probably came from When Evil Lurks. But I ended up going with a slightly different choice, only because it was one of the scenes that really surprised me this year, and just the brutal nature of how it was. And that was Riley with the old face slam. And
Oh yeah.
the scene when he's doing to talk to me and he's possessed by a spirit and the spirit is in him longer than it should be and it just lashes out by absolutely destroying this poor kid's face. He slams his face into the desk repeatedly, and then he slams it into his own sister's hand. And then I know I'm kind of combining scenes, but then later on, he's in the bathroom getting a shower and
Yeah.
he does it to himself again. They brutalized that poor kid like you would not believe. Joe Bird, I believe was his name, the actor.
Yeah.
They just brutalized that poor kid. But when you see the aftermath of him bashing his own face against the desk, and then obviously again in the hospital, I mean it is worse than you could imagine of someone getting their head beat in. It literally looks like someone beat him with a baseball bat, yet he's still alive.
Yeah. Oh God, it was so brutal. I remember I saw that movie 3 times this year, and I saw every single time I saw it with a crowd. That scene just everybody was like, like, oh my God, this is so fucking brutal. And then the sound design in that scene too, in both versions, like when he's in the bathroom and when he's in the den or whatever, the slamming sound of his head hitting that stuff, like maximum effectiveness for those scenes. And it was disturbing because it's like I don't know. It looked fucking off. Don't. And he also like tears at his eyeball and shit. It's fucking
Tries to scoop
gnarly.
out an eyeball, and yeah, it's pretty nasty. And it's just like, and also what I appreciate also is every single time he slams his head, he comes up more damage. Like I know
Yeah,
that seems, pretty obvious, but like they really did. Like, oh, one time down, your head's bashed in. One time down, your cheekbones messed up. One time down, blood pouring. Oh, let's
yeah,
scoop out an eyeball, and yeah, it's wild. It's a wild,
brutal.
wild scene, and it's relentless. So that was my best score of the year. Patrick, let's talk. I'm going to skip around here a little bit before we get to our final top five. And let's talk about, we talked about there were some negative moments this year. What is our most disappointing moment of 2023? We got to put it in here. We said it's best and worst. It can't just be about the best.
Yeah.
I'll go first because you know what's coming.
Hmm.
My most disappointing, not I don't know why I'm shocked by this, but my most disappointing moment of 2023 was by far The Exorcist Believer. It's well documented, if you are a even casual listener of this show, that David Gordon Green is not getting a Christmas card from me this year. He ruined his chances after he made Halloween Ends, which is one of the top 5 worst horror films I've ever seen. And I'm grading that on a scale because I understand when you put Sharktopus versus Megalodon, I'm not grading it on that scale.
Right.
Horror films that I actually looked forward to seeing and it was that bad, Halloween Ends. I moved beyond my disdain for Halloween Ends and legitimately got excited for for Exorcist Believer for a couple reasons. One, Halloween 2018 was incredible. We both loved that movie. So my first initial thought was, hey, They're talking about doing the Exorcist trilogy. Even if the next two films are not good, David Gordon Green had a track record for knowing how to at least do it once. And then you bring back Ellen Burstyn to play Chris McNeil. You brought her back for the first time in 50 years. 50 years. She'd never appeared in any sequels, nothing. You got her back. And then you shit the bed. The more I've thought about that movie over the course of the last couple of months, Patrick, I've grown to dislike it more and more because of how many misses there were in that film. It was just like the target was right in front of them. And I understand it's dangerous to play fan service because sometimes when you do that, you end up with the new Star Wars trilogy where it just sucks ass by the end of it. And I was like, can we just kill everyone? Like, do we need anyone to survive this thing? When you start paying too much attention to fan service, like you react to fan service.
Yeah, you should not.
The fans didn't like this, let's change it. The fans didn't like this character, let's drop him. Should never do that. There were so many openings for good fan service in Exorcist Believer, and they blew it every single time, minus one moment, which was when Reagan comes back. That was like the one, like, oh my gosh, they did it kind of moment. And that was fleeting. That was at the end of the movie, and I was like, I'm over this already. I don't even care. That movie was so disappointing to me because we did the review for The Exorcist on this podcast. It is one of the greatest horror films ever, and I certainly, to be clear, certainly did not expect it to live up to those expectations. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure I said this on the podcast, I couldn't possibly judge. That's unfair.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to do that.
But I did judge it as a horror film, at least set in that universe. And it was so utterly disappointing.
Damon, it may shock you to find out that my most disappointing moment of the year is also Exorcist Believer, which was, one of my anticipated movies from this year. And for different reasons, though, truth be told. Like, I think we're both disappointed by the Ellen Burstyn portion of it all. That I don't think that part went over well, but it didn't bother me terribly because I kind of understood, like, she's 90 years old. You can use her the way you can use her. And the way they used her was probably very dissatisfying for a lot of hardcore fans of the original film. But also I understood. I was like, well, she's elderly. I don't think you're going to have a ton of days with her on set. She's going to do the days she does, and that's how they fit her in as best they could. And they said she was a joy to work with, and she brought a lot of fun to the set. So all good there. It didn't work for me, but it's all good. That's fine. My biggest umbrage, Damon, with Exorcist Believer was how it turned into a very basic exorcism movie. That was my disappointment with it. I really could forgive the Ellen Burstyn part where some people can't. It's like too hallowed ground for them. They're too faithful to the original to forgive that. To me, that wasn't the problem at all. The problem was just how forgettable the rest of the movie was. That part bugged me more than anything. I was like, and again, you do have to measure yourself with expectations, even beyond fan service. If you put a bunch of expectations on a movie, which I think I kind of did, it was on my list of most anticipated, so I did have expectations. I expected it to go very hard because, truth be told, as much as we kind of hemmed and hawed about certain aspects of the David Gordon Green Halloween trilogy, it went hard. It was brutal. It was some of the most brutal that you'll ever see out of the Halloween series. So I thought to myself, if we go in this highly disturbing, highly hardcore direction for Exorcist Believer, maybe that will make up for what little shortcomings it may have. And it didn't. It ended up becoming a very predictable exorcism film for me. And so that was the part that bummed me out, whereas I was like, I'm leaving this film, and I gave it, I think at the time, a C+. I might downgrade that to like a C- or something as I've thought about it over the year. But I just didn't come out of it going, I can't wait to see what these characters do next. I think there's potential for another story out of what happened there, but I believe it was a wait and see situation. And if I don't think Exorcist Believer did what they wanted it to do, we may never see another Exorcist from David Gordon Green. Which calm down, Damon. Calm your excitedness, but I don't think he's coming back for another Exorcist.
Yeah, all I've heard is that there's a good chance we may not see a sequel to this, and in a way that bums me out, just because, like, I do want franchises to succeed, and I don't want people to stop totally making
Yeah.
Exorcist movies. But I would, while I did have a huge list of grievances, your grievance is also on my list. That's one I didn't necessarily mention. I would say yes, you didn't go hard enough. I mean, the original Exorcist came out in 1973, and it went freaking hard. We were still marveling at some of the things they did in that movie 50 years ago. We had a category which you can see on our TikTok and on our Instagram page, where I still can't believe they did this 50 years later. I'm like, how in the hell did they do this? The crucifix scene. We all know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Now again, I understand you can go for shock factor and try to duplicate that, but just in general going hard, just in general making it a wild exorcism movie, and it just felt very paint by the numbers, and nothing about that film stood out. Nothing. It was the definition of mediocre. And again, I didn't hate it, but the more I've thought about it, the angrier I've gotten, because I'm like, you just didn't do this, and you didn't do that, and you didn't try this, and you didn't try that. Listen, say what you will about Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends. He tried. He failed miserably, in my opinion, in Halloween Ends, but he tried. Didn't like it. I hate it. Never want to see it again. But it's almost like he didn't try anything in Exorcist Believer, with the exception of, we're going to have two girls possessed. That was the whole premise. I was like, this is interesting. We loved the trailer. Go back and listen to our reaction. Watch our reaction to the Exorcist trailer. We loved it. I was like, oh, I'm in. I'm so in. Just didn't do it for me at all. Didn't get me excited. Certainly didn't make me want a sequel. And as I said, as the years gone on, I've gotten angry and angry about it. It's like, you didn't do the thing you were supposed to do.
I mean, the only reason I would push back on that particular thing, which is the thing you're supposed to do, it's like, well, every filmmaker is going to try their thing. That's the thing they're going to end up doing. But listen, if the Pope's Exorcist subverted my expectations far more than Exorcist Believer, and I don't think you and I are having the Pope Exorcist on our top five. I don't know. I don't know what your list is, but I wouldn't call that a top five movie for me. And it managed to subvert my expectations far more, to the point where I was like, well, that's kind of fucking interesting. And I might actually go see another Russell Crowe Pope's Exorcist. Like, I just might. I didn't get that from Exorcist Believer. And yeah, it's disappointing.
And we said, I've actually said on this show before, Patrick, that I've changed my opinion on the whole idea of, like, if you make a good PG-13 horror film. Because I used to have the opinion, when you do a PG-13 horror film, I'm immediately going in thinking this isn't going to be as good, because you can't go as hard. Whether it's language, story, graphic nature of the gore, all those kind of things come into play. And I've always said, man, I kind of get a little down when I see a PG-13 rating. I will say, over the last couple of years, I've revisited and seen some pretty quality PG-13 films that are horror films. I've been pretty impressed with them. And I think I said this on the podcast when we reviewed Exorcist Believer. I said, if you just delete a couple things, this is a PG-13 movie. Didn't
Yeah.
feel at all like an Exorcist movie. Like, they didn't go for shock factor just for the sake of shock factor. There was nothing shocking at all. And yeah, it just really bummed me out. And again, I want to be clear, I did not go in with a preconceived notion, because my opinion about David Gordon Green is pretty well documented. But I was still legitimately excited,
Yeah.
based upon the trailer and his history with at least getting one really right. Didn't.
Yeah. That's okay. We can't win them all, folks.
Yeah.
And in the case of David Gordon Green, I mean, boy, he's striking out with Damon on a regular basis these days.
Yeah, he's not going to, like I said, he's not getting a Christmas card from me this year. Sorry. Patrick, what was our big surprise movie of the year? What was your biggest surprise movie of 2023? One you didn't see coming?
Well, this one happened just a few weeks ago for me, Damon. And it's a little movie called El Conde. You haven't seen this movie
I
yet?
have not seen El Conde, no.
It's on Netflix. For anyone that has a Netflix subscription, go check it out. This movie surprised me the most this year, because I remember seeing the trailer and going, okay, it looks kind of interesting. When I watched it, we just finished talking about how subversion kind of is the key to a great movie, to a movie really impacting you. El Conde totally subverted me. Now, the basic premise of this movie, if you don't know, is that there's a bunch of or this vampire in Chile who's on a farm with his family, and he's kind of coming to his final years, and they all want like his riches or wherever they may be hidden. It didn't jump out at me as something I needed to go see or sit down and watch. When I watched it, I was pleasantly surprised to find out how quirky it is. I think I told you it's sort of like a Coen Brothers movie.
Yeah.
It's sort of funny. It's darkly funny. It's very gory. It's not scary at all. I wouldn't even qualify it as a horror movie, but it is very gory because these vampires drink blood and they kill and they rip hearts out of people. Like it's the gore is very much apparent, but it's mostly a comedy about a dictator. It's actually a real dictator. It's what's his name? Pinochet from Chile. Like the premise is Pinochet was a vampire this whole time. Um, and it was gorgeous. The cinematography in this movie is incredible, and I won't ruin the scene, but there's a scene near the end of the movie where they shot it, and you go, "How did they shoot this?" It's so beautiful, like just incredible cinematography. It's all in black and white, by the way, and it's just super gorgeous. And there's a scene near the end that you is just a thing of absolute beauty. And for me, it made my surprise movie of the year because it looked like just another Netflix horror movie that I probably wasn't going to watch. And when I watched it, I was surprised for reasons that I didn't expect.
Yeah, I need to check this one out. That was one I didn't see, so I can't really place an opinion on that. Although I do know you texted me when you were watching it, and you seemed pretty blown away by it and pretty surprised by how well it was done. And I have heard a couple other people mention that movie. I just haven't seen it yet, so it's going on the short list of films I need to check out. Hopefully before the end of this year, when I get a little bit of a break, I'm going to try to tack on a few more films this year before 2023 is over. So I have not seen it, but I have heard good things. So for me, my biggest surprise really came down to a movie that I knew we were going to review. I knew I was going to see it in the theater, but my expectations were kind of low, if I'm being honest. And that's why it ends up being my biggest surprise of 2023, and that is Saw X.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not a massive Saw franchise fan. I think the first film is an utter classic, and I really do enjoy the second film. Every Saw movie after that is very much in that B minus C plus range for me. They're not bad. They're not particularly good though. It's not Scream where it's just like every film I can say is actually pretty good or really good. Scream's had a couple of good ones in there and some completely unbelievably forgettable films in there that were just generic and didn't do well. And I think we talked about this on the podcast that in a lot of ways the Saw writers wrote themselves into a corner by, putting John Kramer into a situation where he had to die and then
Yeah.
he ended up killing off his protege as well. And so after Scream 2, they're like, well, shit, where do we go from here? And then they just start injecting new characters and backtracking and the legacy of Saw and all this other random weird shit. 10 films in, Saw X might be one of the best in the entire franchise. Like they really found a way to reinvent it by bringing back Tobin Bell, bringing back Shawnee Smith, setting it between the events of Saw 1 and Saw 2, which is a tricky, tricky maneuver to pull off. By and large, I would argue you probably ruin things better than improve upon them with those kind of movies or TV shows or whatever when you try to create some sort of prequel or whatever in the middle of something, whatever the case may be. Phantom Menace and the Attack of the Clones in Star Wars would be a great example of that. I would say Saw X totally subverted my expectations because I went in thinking, all right, Tobin Bell's back, Shawnee Smith is back. If this is just halfway decent, I'll be satisfied. I was blown away. I was shocked by how good that movie was. There was heart, there was brutality. You find yourself rooting for a serial killer, which I don't know what that says about us and or the movie-going audience as a whole, but yeah, Saw X really did stun me this year.
I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't. I remember when we got to reviewing it, I was like, "Holy shit, this was actually a good movie!" and the outside of the original Saw, which again I'm right there with you, which is just an absolute classic. I wasn't like looking forward to this. I was like, okay, great. Like another Saw movie. We'll be able to talk about it. Let's see how it goes. And I came out of it going, that's one of the best horror movies of the year for sure. I don't know where, but I know it's better than a lot of other ones. Like it just fucking it delivered everything, and it could have gone horribly wrong, especially bringing back Tobin Bell and Shawnee Smith. It could have gone really wrong, and it didn't. It just felt right in line with the franchise, and it's a companion to all those movies in a really great way. And this is the 10th film.
Yeah.
On what planet does number 10 deliver the way the first one does? That's a feat in and of itself. That's a surprise. That's a very legit pick for surprise movie of the year.
And that's why I said, even going back to Scream, like 6 movies that are all really good. Imagine getting to your 10th Saw film, and I would argue that's probably in my top 3 Saw films now. Like Saw 1, Saw
Easily.
2, Saw X.
Yeah.
That never happens. You don't get to, and all, again, this is all in the same linear, this is all part of the same story. They've never retconned it or created a whole new legacy. This has all been Jigsaw being Tobin Bell's character, John Kramer. This has all been his from day one. We're now on the 10th film, and somehow they pulled off a magic trick, and the 10th film was like one of the best of the entire franchise. It's, again, shocking.
It's Jamin. It might. I mean, we're not ranking Saw films today, but it might rank higher than Saw 2 for me. Like, I mean, it might.
I'd have to see it a couple more times, but it might pop there for me too. Like the only one that's not going to top is Saw. I can say the original Saw is not getting trumped, but
yeah, it's special.
It's not out of the realm of possibility if I see Saw X a couple more times and be like, yeah, you know what? That could be number 2. Which, trust me, that was a film like we got to, when it came out, it was we have to review this one. And then I left the theater thinking, damn, I get to review this one. Like, yeah. Again, pleasantly surprised.
You never think number 10 is going to be that good.
You do not. Trust me. I went in with the lowest of expectations and came out being like, you know what? I was legitimately enthusiastic to see that movie. It was really well done. Let's talk real quick before we get to our top 5 candidates. One more category to get to, Patrick, and we got to talk about, well, actually 2 more categories because we got one more, we actually have a non-horror category coming up in 1 second. But right now, let's talk about Best Missed. This is the category where we talk about a film we saw in 2023 that didn't come out this year that we saw for the first time in 2023. Last year, I was very proud that my pick was Hell House LLC, which ended up being a film that you didn't see till this year, and you really enjoyed it. And I was so happy that you did because you're not the biggest found footage fan. That was my pick last year. I watched a lot of horror this year, Patrick. I watched, as I said, I watched less than you. I probably watched between 60 and 70 films. You watched 82, I think you said?
82.
I didn't find a lot this year that I hadn't seen before that I was really blown away by, being honest. I have one really good choice, and then, a lot of other kind of like, okay, pretty good. Do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
Why don't you go first? Because I actually have a huge list.
Okay. So I have one that really stood out. I didn't want to go too deep. I wanted to give you one that really stood out for me, like I did with Hell House LLC last year. My best missed film of 2023 is a movie called Triangle. Have you heard of this movie?
I don't think so.
It is a movie that stars Melissa George. It's a 2009 film. I believe it's currently available on Shudder, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, hi, Shudder.
And it is a film that really shocked me with how well done it was. It's a psychological horror film that kind of takes a lot of twisting timelines and almost parallel universe narratives and mixes it in, shakes it all up, and throws it back out as a horror film. These people are on a boat going on like a day cruise, like a day trip in a boat. Their boat breaks down and they need rescue, and they're out in the middle of nowhere in the ocean. And they see this big, massive, like cruise liner ship come out of the fog in the distance, and they seek out to try to find help on this ship because their boat is incapacitated. They climb aboard this ship, and weird shit starts happening right away. And it's not Ghost Ship, by the way, which is a really fun, dumb horror film from the early 2000s. weird shit starts happening that you don't see coming, and there's a lot of twists and turns, a lot of surprises. Liam Hemsworth is in this movie. The star is Melissa George, who I've always enjoyed and everything she's done. Of course, she did 30 Days a Night, which is a film we reviewed earlier this year, which we both love. Really, really good movie, really fun movie, and definitely kept me guessing until the very end. So Triangle is my pick for the best missed of 2023. I believe it's available on Shudder right now. It's from 2009. I would highly recommend checking that film out.
That premise doesn't even ring familiar at all to me. So I will have to check that one out. Who knows? Maybe that ends up on my next year's best miss list if I don't watch it today.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was really stunning. I didn't see it coming. Good cast. You know, Melissa George is really quality. Liam Hemsworth, even though he's one of the lesser Hemsworth brothers. It was good. I was genuinely surprised, and it's a film that I do look forward to seeing again.
All right. Well, I'm going to check that out. Damon, my best missed list was actually huge this year. I didn't realize some of these movies I hadn't even seen until this year. That's at top of that was Hell House LLC, based on your best missed from last year. Another movie I didn't realize I'd only seen this year was Lake Mungo, which I love, and another found footage movie that I do love. I've probably watched Lake Mungo like 3 times this year. That's how much I like it. Another movie that I hadn't seen until this year was Fall, which we talked a little bit about in our Descent podcast. Another great nail biter of a horror movie. Last Shift, which we talked earlier in this year about Last Shift and Malum. Malum came out this year as a remake of The Last Shift. Last Shift is fucking rad, and if you haven't seen Last Shift, go find it, because it's one of those movies where you're just like, shit, they did this for nothing in one location, and it's really good and really effective for what it is. I had never seen The Autopsy of Jane Doe, starring the great Brian Cox. I finally saw it this year, and it kicks fucking ass. I finally saw Terrified this year from Damien Rugna, because everybody had been talking about it. I'd seen Jennifer's Body for the first time this year, which I know, Johnny come lately. I mean, boy, I can't believe I had been missing out on Jennifer's Body all these years. It's a really, really great movie. But my ultimate best miss, Damon, comes in the form of a movie that I had never heard of ever in my life until I was following some horror influencer on TikTok, and it was not our friend Sydney from Horror Chronicles. It was somebody else who said this movie was so disturbing to them, and they couldn't get it out of their head. It's a movie called The Eyes of My Mother. Have you seen this?
I have not seen this.
The Eyes of My Mother, and I think I dropped a little mini review of it on our Instagram. It is disturbing in its own way. And it's another all black and white film, weirdly enough. Yes, Damon, I'm artsy fartsy, okay? You live with me. It is all black and white, and it's a story about a girl who's raised in kind of isolation with her older parents, and then one day a guy shows up and he kills her mother in front of her, and that is not the worst thing that happens in the movie. The movie descends into sort of this madness, and you grow up with this little girl as she gets older, and she lives isolated in this like kind of farmhouse. It's a very, very like artfully made movie, and not on the story side. On the story side, I think it's actually pretty straightforward. It's not hard to follow. It's no Green Knight, Damon, if you're worried. It's an easy movie to follow, but it's just so artfully made. They show the gore and the kills when they want to, and then they leave it up to your interpretation when they feel this is the right time. And that kind of balance was super effective here. Like, they really knew when to show it to you and not show it to you to give you maximum impact. And I thought it was just a tremendously made movie that was made, I think, all the way back in, like, I think it was like 2016, maybe earlier, maybe 2014. I'm not sure. But yeah, The Eyes of My Mother is my year's best missed.
I will need to check that one out. That is not one I know you did. I know you did drop it on our Instagram, and I did watch a review. I've not seen it. Where is it streaming at?
Where did I watch it? Let me find out real quick, because I think it is worth it if it's out there. I want to say I watched it on like Pluto TV or something.
Yeah.
Oh shit. Let me see here.
Yeah, because I know Triangle is on Shudder, and I think it's actually on, I want to say, Amazon Prime as well. So if you want to check that one out, but I'm not. I remember watching a review for Eyes of My Mother, but I never saw it. So I am Infinitely curious. I do want to throw out a special shout out to Autopsy of Jane Doe. That's a film we're going to have to review at some point on the show. I learned an interesting fact about that movie over this past week. I was watching an interview with Emil Hirsch, who played the other doctor, the other technician in that movie alongside Brian Cox. And it's so funny. See, I'm a big Quentin Tarantino guy. Love
Mm-hmm.
Tarantino has only ever made one kind of horror film, and that was Death Proof, and that's not really. It's
Yeah,
more.
it's like a thriller.
Um, but he loves horror. And I saw Emil Hirsch do an interview, and he was cast. He got like fourth on the call sheet in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood when he got cast in that movie as Jay, the hairdresser friend of Sharon Tate, the real life, the guy Jay Sebring, who really did die. He played that character in that movie, and he said that he was on Facebook of all places, and Quentin Tarantino, who apparently has a Facebook page, which I
Oh,
love,
okay.
obsessively stalked trying to make him my friend. He sent him a message and said, "Hey, I saw the autopsy of Jane Doe. I loved it. I want to offer you a part in my next movie." Now, if you've seen the autopsy of Jane Doe and you've seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, they are not similar movies in any way,
Yeah.
shape, or form. But I love that Tarantino saw that horror film, saw Emil Hirsch, and was like, I want that guy in my movie. And when he said that, I was like, that's so amazing because I know Quentin is a huge horror fan. He just hasn't really made a horror movie. But seeing the autopsy of Jane Doe made Quentin Tarantino go, I want that guy in my movie. I love that story.
No, that's rad, and that's a great movie. And I was like, man, I can't believe I hadn't seen this movie yet. And just to let you guys know, it's The Eyes of My Mother is actually streaming free in a lot of places like Roku, Redbox, Pluto TV, Tubi, Sling, and Vudu, and Plex are all streaming it for free.
There you go. The Eyes of My Mother. I'll have to check that out. I remember seeing your review and I never actually watched it, so I'll have to definitely
Yeah,
check that out.
yeah,
Uh,
definitely my kind of shit.
Last category before we get to our top five, and that is our favorite non horror films of 2023. Now, Patrick, you and I are massive horror fans. That's been well documented. You watched over 100 some odd movies, 82 were horror. So the majority of your films that you watched this year were horror. I would say absolutely the same for me. Again, I didn't keep total count. I know I watched somewhere between 60 and 70 horror films. I would definitely say I saw over 100 movies this year. Either way, that would still make horror the predominant genre that I watched this year. But we are cinephiles. We are film fans in general. It's that time of year where we're getting into Oscar season, we're getting into award season. So, Patrick, what were your favorite non-horror films of 2024 or
And
2020?
I want to credit Damon Martin with coming up with this category because, truth be told, you and I could easily do a podcast about any other kind of movie genre or any movies in general. We could do this all day. We fucking love watching movies. And so when you were like, hey, we should talk about some of the movies that aren't horror that we like, just to give the fans a taste of what we're into outside of this. If you can guess, some of mine are probably lesser known movies, but they're fucking great anyway. American Fiction, fantastic movie starring Jeffrey Wright that is just so funny and dramatic and interesting. The Holdover starring Paul Giamatti, one of my absolute favorites of the year. Kind of a throwback to the 1970s dramedies. Dream Scenario starring Nicolas Cage, which I think I did. I don't know. Did I post it on our Instagram? I
Uh,
think I think I might have.
I think you might have, yeah.
Dream Scenario is one of those weird movies. It's a very surrealist film, but it has horror elements, like real horror elements that I didn't see coming. I didn't know were going to be in there, to the point that some people in the audience were actually like covering their eyes. They weren't ready for the little moments in Dream Scenario that were going to be horrific. That's Nicolas Cage starring as a sort of a milk toast professor that everyone in the world starts dreaming about for no reason. They don't know why. It had horror elements in it, but it was also like a really, really laugh out loud funny movie. Very interesting movie with a lot of great social commentary. Another movie I love this year, Damon, I'm pretty sure most people have watched, and I know you've watched, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I watched that movie 5 times this year. 2 of them in the theater, 3 at home on Disney Plus, and I cried every single fucking time. I fucking loved that movie. I thought that movie was fantastic.
Yeah, I loved Guardians of the Galaxy 3. That was the one the one Marvel movie that really surpassed expectations this year. James Gunn is incredible. He knows those characters. It was, man, I wept at that movie. That
Yeah.
movie, there were moments in that movie I was like, oh my god, fuck you, James Gunn. Uh, great pull on that one. I would definitely put Guardians of the Galaxy on my list as well for best non-horror films of 2023.
By the way, you could kind of argue there's like horrific elements in Guardians 3 as well.
Oh, there definitely are. And the
Yeah.
moment that made me cry was a very sad moment. Like it was just like, it was like, fuck you, James Gunn. Um, I only picked a few because I didn't want to go too deep because we only have so much time on the podcast and we are a horror movie podcast. My best, I'll put at the top of the list just to mention it first, non horror movie of 2023 was Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. I have a real deep connection to this film, not only because it's incredible, but because I read the book 2 years ago, knowing this film was coming out. Had Leonardo DiCaprio was my favorite actor, had Scorsese, one of my favorite filmmakers, Robert De Niro, Lily Gladstone, great cast, Jesse Plemons,
Lemons, yeah.
great cast. But I read the book, and the murder of the Osage people in the early 1900s, who basically they had oil rights and people tried to steal it from them by murdering them. Best way to describe it. Was a story I had never heard of. It was like when I saw and learned about the Tulsa Race Massacre by watching the fucking Watchmen.
Mm-hmm.
Pisses me off to this day. It took me till that show, which was unbelievable, by the way. It pisses me off that it took me until that show came out in like 2021 or whatever it was to know that the Tulsa Race Massacre. I had no idea. Never taught in school. I thought it was part of the fiction. I thought it was part of the show. And someone was like, "No, that really happened." I was like, "What the fuck?" I was not familiar with this story either until I read the book. And the movie, yes, it's 3.5 hours. It is intense. It will take you a lot to get through. But I will say this, as a person who has now seen it 3 times, it gets better with every viewing. I adore that movie, and I hope it wins every award out there. I absolutely loved it. Other films on my non-horror films list I want to mention. I do want to mention, where's my list at here? Hold on, I just scroll back up again. There it is. I will mention a comedy that I really enjoyed this year called Bottoms.
Yeah.
Rachel Sennett, who was in a horror movie called Bodies, Bodies, Bodies that I did not enjoy last year. It is a really funny, goofy, good old school comedy. That is a film that took risks and didn't try to apologize for making you feel a little uncomfortable at moments. It was funny. It was stupid. It was goofy comedy, but really, really good performances. The other star of the movie is Ao, the girl from The Bear.
Oh yeah. Yeah, she's great.
She's incredible. The other person besides Jeremy Allen White, the main star in The Bear. She was incredible. That's a really funny movie. And then a movie that made me so wildly uncomfortable, but it was still great, was a movie called Saltburn.
Oh
And a
yeah.
lot of people are talking about that movie. That movie is wild.
That was out there.
It is a full-on 8 ball of cocaine in one day movie. It is. You'll walk out of the theater going, "What in the fuck did I just witness?" It is mind-numbingly crazy. I do also want to mention The Holdovers. I literally just watched it last night. Absolutely adored that movie. I would say that's probably number 2 for me this year behind Killers of the Flower Moon now. The Holdovers was
Holdovers great.
And my last movie I want to mention, it actually comes out, by the time this podcast drops, it will be out there. So I'm going to mention it because I saw a screener. The Iron Claw from A24. It's about the Von Erich professional wrestling family. I grew up in pro wrestling. I actually used to be a pro wrestler back in the day, for those who don't know. I'm very familiar with their story. It's a very tragic story.
Yeah.
Jeremy Allen White, Zac Efron, incredible movie, heartbreaking movie. And whether you're a pro wrestling fan or not, you don't need to be to see this movie and enjoy it. I would highly recommend when it comes out on December 22nd that everyone go see The Iron Claw.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the Iron Claw, and I've seen pretty much all those movies that you listed there. outside of I think Bottoms, but Saltburn, fucking crazy movie, dude. Saltburn's like, you know how like we haven't watched Euphoria in a while. It's kind of been off the air for a minute. It's like watching Euphoria. You go, what the fuck? Why are young people doing this? And what is wrong with them? Do I need to call their parents?
It's wild. There was one
Yeah,
scene I texted you after because you had seen it before
yeah.
me. And I texted you afterward and I was like, Patrick, this fucking movie.
This
What the
fucking
fuck
movie.
did I just see? But I loved it. Like I really
Yeah,
enjoyed it. It was a really well done movie, but it was it was a movie that will haunt me for a long time for not and also I'm not to I was laughing with that one. It's not horror, but you could I swear to God you could categorize Killers of the Flower Moon as horror with all the atrocities that are
oh
carried
yeah.
out. Like, holy shit. The atrocities carried out in that movie will make you like feel like you just got out of a horror film.
And the tub scene in Saltburn will make you feel like you fucking just walked out of Saw X.
Yeah.
Like I was like, stop this before I vomit. Like
You know,
just stop doing this.
I'll be honest, like with the most shocking moments of the year, like gore. Like you and I are gore whores. We admit that. Like
Totally.
we are gore fiends. Like I love good gore. I definitely do, and I do not get particularly squeamish with it. Even like
Me neither.
the leg shaving scene in Cabin Fever was disgusting. Didn't bother me all that much. The cheese grater scene in Evil Dead Rise was amazing. Didn't bother me. I was like, this is really cool. What a great idea. That's how fucked up I am. Saltburn, the bathtub scene, and I'm not going to say what it is, what happens. You're going to be like, the bathtub scene? That disturbed me more than any horror film I saw this year.
Most disturbing scene of the year. Barry Keoghan in the bathtub is easily by
Oh,
far not a horror movie, but I was just like, oh, okay, stop doing that. Stop doing that. Like, so disgusting.
I'm glad I didn't eat my lunch before seeing this movie.
Oh,
It would be all over the
God.
screen in front of me. Because I saw it in the theater. I saw it in the theater, so it was up on the
Yeah.
screen and watching this unfold.
I'm on 100-foot screen with Dolby surround sound here. I don't know. I'm not going to talk about it right now.
You can't say
It's
it.
fucking
Just
disgusting.
understand, Saltburn bathtub scene, you will be fucked up for years to come. You will
It's
not
so
forget.
disgusting.
So disgusting. Unbelievably disgusting. All right. It is that time, Patrick. It is time to discuss our top 5 best horror films of the year. I wish I had a sound cue pulled up.
Dun, dun, dun.
A
Dun,
drum
dun,
roll.
dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, you know what? We talk about the best of the absolute best. The absolute best here, and we know how to get. You know what I should have played before we did our most disappointing films of the year. It should have been like,
Buongiorno. Grazie.
Lo pronuncio correttamente?
Sì, corretto. Gorlami. Gorlami.
that was one of our sound bites earlier this year when we did the Pope's Exodus, the greatest accents in films. That one, Gorlami, correcto.
Correcto.
Correcto. Yeah. So I don't have a drum roll. I don't have any prep for this. But before we get to our top 5 films, I do want to give us a chance to throw out some mentions of honorable mentions real quick. Or do you want to do that before or after?
Maybe we do it after because I won't belabor them. I'll just say, hey, shout out to this movie.
So let's start again. You and I don't know each other's lists. We have no idea where we're ranking these things. So let's just start at number 5. Patrick, what is your number 5 best horror film of 2023?
My number 5 best horror film of 2023 is Godzilla minus one. Now, Damon, the truth is, it's number 5 on my list because I know that it skirts the line of horror. Actually, a lot of other horror podcasts and outlets have been talking about Godzilla minus one this year. But let's be honest, it sort of lives in its own genre, which is the kaiju genre or whatever. But it is somewhat of a subset of horror. I know that there's hardcore horror fans from years, myself included, who are Godzilla and King Kong fanatics and watch all those movies. But the ones that come out, like the Adam Wingard ones, Godzilla versus King Kong, those are just big action, big popcorn movies. Nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But they really aren't horror. Godzilla minus one sort of harkens back to the older style of Godzilla, where it's just Godzilla and he's just going to fuck shit up. And he's not a good guy. He's a bad guy. And it's an incredibly well-made movie. It really is. And it is in our genre. It's somewhere in our subset of genre, and the only reason it doesn't rank higher is because I do believe, for the most part, it's not truly a horror film, but it's a really well made film. It's a fantastic story. It's one of the few movies this year that did make me cry at the end, which is crazy to say in a Godzilla movie. Like when I came home and my wife's like, "Oh, what, did Godzilla die?" I go, "No, it had nothing to do with Godzilla. It's a fucking great movie. It's just a really good movie." The special effects are the best I've ever seen for a Godzilla movie, period. They are incredible. And this is not a high budget movie. It's about $15 million, which is big for it's a Japanese production, and that's an expensive Japanese movie. They don't spend a ton of money on their movies. The effects are, it's the best looking Godzilla you'll ever see. He really feels like he's there in the moment. And again, I'll just reiterate that the story is incredible. Godzilla minus one is my number 5 for my top 5 horror movies of 2023.
I wish I could place a different opinion on this one. I haven't seen it yet. I've been trying to get to the theater to see it. I've just been so busy with my regular work that I haven't had time, but I've heard nothing but good things. And I don't have it on my list because I haven't seen it, but I do look forward to seeing this. I'll be honest, I'm not a big kaiju fan. I'm not a big Godzilla fan. King Kong, Mothra, none of that really does much for me. I've never been a massive fan, but I've heard so much about Godzilla minus one that I actually do want to see this. So I'm pretty excited to eventually sit down and watch this. Maybe that'll be on my best missed of next year because I haven't seen it yet. So
yeah, the good news, Damon, is you don't have to be a fan of Godzilla to like this movie. Like, it's not really that kind of movie.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. It skirts expectations different what you would expect from a Godzilla movie, which I appreciate because I'm not a big Godzilla fan, if I'm being honest.
All good.
My number 5 horror film, best horror film, was probably, and this was also on the whole surprising list. This is why I didn't put it as my surprise because I had it in my top 5. A film that I went into not even knowing if I would enjoy it. Honestly, thought I would walk out not enjoying it. Not only did I enjoy it, I loved it, and it gave me my best performance of 2023. That is Infinity Pool. Brandon Cronenberg's Infinity Pool. It is a weird, twisty turny sci-fi horror spectacle that is like an acid trip at times, which I'll be honest, again, I'm not always the biggest fan of these kinds of movies. But when I walked out of Infinity Pool and then we reviewed it on the show, I think I said it like 10 times on the episode where I'm like, I can't believe how much I like this movie. Like, it was just really genuinely original and surprising, and a lot of twists and turns I didn't see coming. The performances were great. As I mentioned, Mia Goth was incredible. Alexander Skarsgård was solid. The whole cast was great. And just a really original, different story. And I always applaud originality in horror because while I do love the tried and true formula that works, especially my favorite genre, slasher, this was a film that totally twisted and turned, and I didn't see it coming.
It's a great movie. Great. It's there's a lot of like philosophical questions in it, which I love because I'm an art weirdo. And it's Brandon Cronenberg, who's from horror pedigree. He's David Cronenberg's son, and he's turning out great movies. I think his other movie like swept the Fangoria Awards the year it came out. Infinity Pool, good on all levels. Well made movie. Leaves you asking tons of questions in a very good way. It's great. Like, that's the kind of movie like I would have got out of that movie and gone to like a coffee shop or something with my friends and just talked about it for hours. It's a really, really good, very, very interesting movie. That premise is genuinely like horrific and kind of sticks you in your seat going, fuck, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Again, didn't see it coming, and I maybe I'm judging it on a bit of a curve because when I went in, I was like, this is gonna be a weird fucking I don't understand what's going on here art house movie. This is something Patrick's gonna love, and I'm gonna hate. We're gonna talk about like Men when we did that film last year. No, I was blown away. Not only did I understand it, but I was shocked how well done it was, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to whatever Brandon Cronenberg does next.
100%.
Number 4 for you, Patrick. What is your number 4 horror film of 2023?
It started to get tough right around here. It started to get tough to figure out what was going to come into play. But my number 4 horror movie of the year was The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster. I had a chance to see it at South by Southwest, and I was not able to. It was hard to get tickets to certain screenings. There was a weird like kind of lottery pool you got to get into to get screenings, and I missed it. My friend went to go see it, and he goes, "I fucking hated that movie. That movie sucked. It was like the worst movie I've ever seen." Turns out my friend hates horror movies. So I was like, I think I need to watch this. I ended up watching it when it came to Shudder, and I love it. And I love it because it kind of is a throwback to the 80s, early 90s, where kids are at the center of fighting against evil, which is something you and I grew up with. We just expected kids to be able to take on evil. There's something about that. And these kids aren't very young. I think these are like teenagers, but still. Um, so it was it's a very modern take on Frankenstein. And I loved the premise. I loved the characters. I loved the setting, which it takes place in a black neighborhood. It's just something that I don't have a lot of reference for. I did grow up in a black neighborhood, but in a different time, in a different place. And this was talking about the here and the now. And so I got to learn a lot. I got to experience new things and new perspectives. And also just it's just a great movie that keeps you on the edge of your seat the entire time. So I had to give it my number 4 spot.
It is a take on the Frankenstein story, more or less. I
Yeah.
had not seen it until you mentioned it. I had seen it on Shudder, that it was out there, and I heard good things about it. Also, I assume the friend who doesn't like horror, you're no longer friends with him. I'm guessing that's what happened. Uh,
I just know how to take his horror advice. That's for sure.
yeah. Yeah, I actually did see this one after you mentioned it, and I really enjoyed it. It was a fun movie. I'll, not to bury the lead here. It's going to be on my honorable mentions list. Didn't make my top 5, but it was a really fun, inventive, creative take on this. And there's been so many reinventions of that genre, whether we're talking of that film, Frankenstein is such an iconic story. There's a new one coming out next year written by Diablo Cody, the writer of Jennifer's Body, called Lisa Frankenstein. They're literally remaking in that version. So it's been redone a million times. This was a really wholly original story, though, which I enjoyed. So yeah, I agree. This was a great movie. I really did dig that, and that's on my honorable mention list. For me, number 4. This is where it got a little tougher because I was like, do I want to go with a film that really totally surprised me and I didn't see coming, or do I want to pick a film that actually lived up to expectations? I decided to go to the latter. And my number 4 best horror film of 2023 is Eli Roth's Thanksgiving. Didn't reinvent the wheel.
Nope.
It's a slasher. It's a classic slasher. And it lived up to every last expectation I had. It was brutal. It was more brutal than what I expected, if I'm being honest. Like, I thought they were actually going to tone it down slightly. No. Brutal. Some of the best kills of the year happened in this movie. Performances are great. Patrick Dempsey's well established. Gina Gershon. The cast is great. This is a film that was 16, 17 years in the making based on a trailer that came out during the Grindhouse double feature in 2007, of all things. And Eli Roth finally decided, you know what, let's just make this into an actual movie. It was one of the most fun times I've had at the theater this year. It was everything I wanted it to be. It was everything I needed it to be. I love a good slasher, well documented, and this film did that for me. It was new, which gave it a little bit of a bonus boop, but it wasn't a little bonus bump. It wasn't a sequel or anything. They are making a sequel, which, by the way, I mentioned this to Eli Roth on Twitter, on Instagram. I've thrown it everywhere. I don't want credit. I just want you to use it. When they do the sequel that's going to come out in 2025, you got to title it, I Know What You Did Last Thanksgiving. I'm just saying, that's my title. I'm sticking with it. I really enjoyed this film, Patrick. It was just a blast. It was just a blast to go to the movies and see a great slasher.
It was a pure slasher. I think because I think of we could easily say, okay, well, what about Scream this year? Well, Scream is reinvented the slasher. Scream is a meta slasher. It is different. It is its own genre of slasher. Thanksgiving was not. Thanksgiving harkens back to a Friday the 13th, to a bloody to the why can't I think of the Christmas movie that I'm thinking of? Black Christmas, excuse me. Yeah, Halloween. Like, it is true to the slasher roots, And it even has a touch of what we talked about, the late 90s, early 2000s, angsty 90s teens roots, um, which I think is just Eli Roth sort of interpreting Gen Z and seeing how they are kind of a little more sulky and sad. But it sort of bounced back to kind of feeling like the 90s a little bit, like the 20 year cycle came back around. But it's a pure slasher. It's not trying to be something different. It's not reinventing the wheel, and it delivered because Eli Roth is a scholar of horror, and he's also a gore whore himself. So everything in this movie goes hard, and he decided to make a slasher based on his absolute love of the history of slashers, and it paid off. It paid dividends. It was a great movie.
He made a 2023 slasher that was more brutal and a true R-rated horror film, and just again checked all the boxes. It didn't need to. All it needed to do was check all the boxes, and it did that. I know that sounds like I'm setting low expectations, but that's what I want, and it delivered.
Yeah, I had a few quips with it, but they weren't the kind of they're the kind of quips that exist in every single slasher from the 1980s. It's like if I'd have to complain about all the slashers, and I'm not about to do that. It delivered on what it's supposed to deliver on.
Yeah, number 3. We're now in the top 3. It's getting closer.
Ooh.
What is number 3 for you? Best horror film of 2023.
Number 3, Damon, is Evil Dead Rise. I loved this movie. It was a wild ride, and I've seen it a couple of times because I got to saw it first. I got to see it first at South by Southwest with the filmmakers and the actors. Sam Raimi was there doing panels. It was kind of fun. There was a lot of like very fun, emotional build up in that crowd. But then I went and I got to see it with a regular crowd in the theaters, and the feeling was still the same. This movie goes hard. This movie shows you that the Evil Dead franchise can exist outside of its parameters. It does not have to be a cabin in the woods, and it can still go hard as fuck. When kids aren't safe in the movie, you know shit's about to go down, and a lot of kids die in this movie. A lot of kids
Horrifically, they die.
yeah, they die horrifically. And the kids that do get away, I'm not convinced aren't going to be completely catatonic within 24 hours. Like, it's fucking brutal. It's a brutal movie. And I remember the initial watch at South by Southwest, I thought it was almost kind of fun and lighthearted a little bit. The second watch, I was like, no, this movie's fucking dark as shit. This movie's hardcore and brutal. And one of my friends was like, I was sad afterwards because of just how hard it goes. It goes really hard on this family. And it shows that the Deadites are here to stay.
It takes a film that you feel like you kind of figured out what Evil Dead was. Even with Fede Alvarez's kind of reimagining in 2013, there was still a certain formula that was followed. Now, that's not a bad thing. You and I loved that movie. We reviewed it.
Great movie.
When I say following, it's just like when I said at Thanksgiving. Following a formula isn't a bad thing if you do it right. Fede Alvarez's 2013 film follows a certain formula, goes beyond it, but does what you need to do in an Evil Dead film. Evil Dead Rise is also my number 3.
Oh, shit.
2023. Totally unplanned. When you said that, I was like, damn, talk about timing. It is my number 3 film as well for all the reasons you just said. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not a huge Evil Dead fan. I enjoy them. I watched Evil Dead 2 this year. I still enjoy it. It's still a fun movie. Army of Darkness is goofy and dumb and funny, and I enjoy it. But again, it's not a film that I'm like, oh man, it's on my pantheon of all-time great horror films. Evil Dead Rise, we ranked them when we did the podcast. Evil Dead Rise is my favorite Evil Dead film. It blew me away. It is so original, so fun, so brutal. The characters are great. The performances are off the charts. And even though again, talk about checking all the boxes, it checks all the boxes of an Evil Dead film. You got the Deadites, you got the really horrific kills, you got the weird possession scenes, you got all kinds of weird things happen. But you actually have characters that care about, which was a big deal in this. Well, not that I never cared about Ash, but it was a different feeling with that film.
Yeah.
Characters I care about. Characters I actually wanted to survive. I was like, man, I don't want this. Well, that didn't happen. Fuck. It is so brutal and so relentless. And once it gets going, man, it does not stop. And Yeah, it is an incredible piece of filmmaking, and I was really blown away by Evil Dead Rise. As a not, I would say I would call myself an Evil Dead um outlier. Enjoy
Okay.
it, don't really, not when it comes when the when new ones come out, I'm not like, oh my god, I have to go see this on opening day at the 8 a.m. showing like I would some franchises. I'm just like, yeah, cool, we'll go see it. And I was stunned by how good this movie was.
And Alyssa Sutherland, who plays the Deadite mom, she gets infected by the Deadites, and she's the mom of the children. She almost made my best performance. She was a candidate up there, and I almost picked her as best performance because she really fucking sells the shit out of it. It's an incredible physical, emotional performance that I absolutely loved. Man, this movie. I remember my buddy sitting next to my buddy who's a huge Evil Dead fan. And when you're a huge fan of a franchise, a new take in a very new direction can go really wrong for that person. I turned to him right after it and he goes, "That's fucking amazing, right? Like, I'm not crazy. That was fucking amazing." I go, "Yeah, that's a fucking amazing movie. It was fun."
It was awesome. It was just a really, like I said, I walked out of the theater going, wow, that was really fucking good. Like that was a
Yeah.
really good movie. I've seen it a couple times since then. It's been on
Mhm.
cable. I've rewatched it a couple times. Still enjoy every second of it.
Yeah.
Patrick, we're down to the final two.
Whoa. Oh, Damon, I'm nervous.
So for you, Patrick, what was the number two horror film of 2023?
Damon, I'm pissed the fuck off because I had to pick between one and two. I was gonna cheat and literally make two films my number one because I was like, how am I gonna pick between these movies? Because I'm very passionate about my top two films. I think they're the two best of the year. But my number two, oh, because I'm mad to say it's number two because I feel it's just as legitimate as a number one film, and that is Damien Rugna's When Evil Lurks. This movie says fuck you, and it goes hard. And when it and it's beautifully made, it's gory as shit, it's stress inducing, the panic never stops, the fucking the insanity never ends. It gets worse and worse and worse until the end. And I mean, no spoilers, but if you haven't listened to our review of it, it gets even worse. It just keeps getting worse, and it's done in a really great way. You know, like I'm going to say this, like I love Terrifier 2, but it certainly leans into like 80s cheesy horror, and you love it for that. But it goes and goes and goes and goes harder and harder and harder. That's kind of like what you get into Terrifier for. When Evil Lurks is kind of on the other end of the spectrum, where it's like this could have played as an Exorcist believer. It could have been kind of a prestige marquee movie. It plays more in that space with interesting stories and characters and things that are certainly more grounded, but it keeps going fucking hard and is like, if you were upset about the last thing, just wait, I'll upset you again. I'll find a way to get you upset again. Damien Rugna has maybe has he blown his wad, Damon? Because how do you make a movie? How do you, as a filmmaker, make a movie better than this next time?
What was really fascinating about When Evil Lurks that I really enjoyed is was you said it goes hard. It goes very hard, and everything continues to escalate in this movie from bad to worse, and then from worse to fucking horrific. What I also really enjoyed about When Evil Lurks was the originality portion. This was the year of possession, Patrick. This was the
Yes.
year of possession films. Whether we're talking about Talk to Me, we're talking about Evil Dead Rise, we're talking about Exorcist Believer, and of course When Evil Lurks. When Evil Lurks is a possession movie. It's ultimately a possession movie, but it is unlike any other possession movie you've ever seen, or
Yeah.
maybe will ever see again. Credit to Damien Rugna, an Argentinian filmmaker who is quite brilliant, and this film does explore a lot of themes and atrocities, or I won't say atrocities, a lot of inequalities that are carried
Mm-hmm.
out in his home country, and he puts them in his films. I didn't know what to expect. All I had heard was one reviewer was so shocked and disgusted, but disgusted in a good way. Like, I'm not gonna be able to sleep at night disgusted, like kind of things that happen in this movie. And I was like, damn, I gotta go see this. And I saw it in the theater and I walked out and I was like, yep, that lived up to expectations. Certainly didn't see that. Yeah, it is a relentless, brutal movie that still manages to actually have a truly wholly original story, good performances, executed particularly well, and sign me up for the Damien Rugna fan club. I want to see everything he does.
Yes, I really do. And mythology, by the way, like there's a sort of baked in possession mythology that is like wholly new. It's a completely new way into possession that I had never thought about before. And like they kind of live in this world where the rules are kind of already understood, but it's so grounded and just so brutal, man. I mean, just an unflinching movie. And I'm pissed that it is my number two because it makes it sound like I thought something was superior to it. That's not the point of the rankings, but I had to put it somewhere without cheating. So I put it at number two.
Yeah, they live in a world where the possessions that happen in this movie are known. Like people know about it. You don't have to spend half the movie learning the rules.
Yeah.
People
And you don't have people going, well, that's not a thing. It is a thing.
And everyone knows it's a thing, and they're
Yeah.
reacting to the thing. And I appreciated that it's like I know this is a weird comparison. It's like how when they finally kickstarted and did a new Spider-Man movie with Tom Holland, they're like, we're not going to do the fucking radioactive spider biting him again. Everyone knows that story. Let's just move on. James Gunn is doing a new Superman movie. He's like, no, we're not going to show him crash landing in Krypton and being raised, but we've seen that a million. You know who Superman is. You know how the fuck he got here. Same kind of thing here. They're just like, you know what? We're going to go into this movie and you're going to learn along the way. And these people already know what's going on.
Yeah, fucking great movie, dude. Really, like just it belongs up there with all the great horror movies that have ever been made. You know, I don't know how big that list is, but When Evil Lurks belongs on it.
So my number two film, and I'm going to just go ahead and spoil my honorable mentions a little bit here because When Evil Lurks was the film that I did not want to leave out of my top five, but I did. Only because I wanted to highlight Infinity Pool because that is a film that not only much like When Evil Lurks surprised me, but I went into Infinity Pool thinking I'm going to walk out not enjoying this movie. It was such a weird mind fuck of a movie. And you are an art house goon. You embrace your art house goonness.
Goddamn right.
I am not, and when I went in, certain movies I walk into it, I'm just like, here we go. This is going to be that fucking Patrick movie. To confuse the shit out of me, and I'm going to walk out pissed off. That's how I left Infinity Pool, or that's how I went into Infinity Pool, came out being blown away. And so I had to put that in my top five, and it kind of bumped out When Evil Lurks, because as great as it was, and I loved it, somewhere a sacrifice had to be made. And so that's why I highlighted Infinity Pool. So my number two horror film of the year, and this was honestly flip-flopping with Evil Dead Rise for number two, is Scream 6. The more I've watched Scream 6, and I've now seen it like 4 times, I just enjoy it that much more. And the aspect that Scream 4 gets right, that I enjoy so much, let me reiterate for like the 9th time on this episode, I hate what they did to Neve Campbell. That they didn't want to pay her what she's worth to get her to come back. The blessing in disguise of that terrible situation that I 1000% do not agree with. Pay her the money. To quote the great John Malkovich in Rounders, pay her. Pay that woman her money. Just to be clear. But the necessity of pulling Neve Campbell out of that film and reworking the movie paid off in such an original way, because you and I, the one concern I had when Scream came back with Scream 5 was, how are you going to continue to work in these legacy characters and bring in new characters we actually care about without just playing the fan service button over and over and over again. And they did a little bit in Scream 5, and there was a couple missteps in that movie. Scream 6 moves beyond that, and the main crux of our story really has nothing truly to do with Sidney Prescott, Billy Loomis, the original. Yeah, there's references and things like that. There's even a freaking museum built in the movie with homages to the entire history of actual, the quote unquote murders that happen in the Scream movies in the real life. But this film was brutal by Scream standards. A lot of blood. One of my favorite lines of the year was the opening, which jumped around a lot. There was a murder, a high profile character gets killed at the beginning, and you think, okay, here we go. But then that's not where it stops, because then you realize that there's actually another killer. And this kid was basically obsessed with movies, and he was making his own stab film in real life. He gets attacked by the real killer in Scream 6, and he goes, well, what about my movie? And the Scream killer goes, fuck your movie, and kills him. That's when I was like, shit, this is on. Like, this is on now. And it just keeps going and keeps going. And it's just, again, for a film that's 6 deep, for this one to be as good as it was, it has no business being as good as it was.
Scream 6 is how Patrick Guerra would make a Scream movie. As somebody who's not a diehard fan of the series, and not against the series, just not it isn't something I live and breathe. That's how I'd make a Scream movie. Is Scream 6. I would change the location. I would change the characters. I would go for more brutal kills. More, the kills in this movie they're very different. It doesn't feel like the franchise kills at all. It feels like somebody's out there to really punish and hurt in a very real hardcore way. I enjoyed this movie. I don't know if I enjoyed it more than Scream 5, but I can tell you this, I didn't like it any less, for sure. I was like, yeah, this movie fucks around. Now, plus I'm biased. I like New York City. So you set something in New York and you're probably going to have my attention.
And that's also, the setting was a big part of it. I loved that they changed the setting, and also, like, you're thinking about a slasher, like, it has to be shrouded in mystery, and you have to, go after kids abandoned on a farmhouse somewhere like they do in all the Friday the 13th movies, or on a campsite or whatever. No, they're in the middle of New York City where there's a billion people walking around. The fact that you can pull that off and actually make it scary is a huge feat. So that's why Scream 6 landed at number 2 for me. It is now time, Patrick, for our number 1 horror film of the year. I don't know your answer, but I have a feeling it's the same film for me. I'm just going to go ahead and just, spurt it out there. For my number 1 film, I have to imagine it's yours as well. I'll give you the floor. The best horror film of 2023 is...
The Exorcist Believer. No, I'm kidding.
You just ruined my day. What are you doing, Patrick?
No, I'm fucking with you. The best movie of the best horror movie of 2023, without a doubt. And I don't even know if Damon, if I'm wrong, then I clearly don't know you. The best movie of 2023 for Damon and myself is Talk to Me. The Philippou brothers out of Australia, a couple of knucklehead YouTubers, made the best horror movie by far of the entire year. Damon, I got to see this way back at South by Southwest. I know that keeps coming up, but it's important. I didn't know what Talk to Me was back in March. I had no idea. I hadn't even heard of it. I hadn't heard rumblings of it or anything. Me and my buddy were just like trying to get into some other horror movies, which, by the way, were very talked about this year and sort of faded away. They didn't end up making the buzz that they thought. And there was this Talk to Me movie, and we go, oh, let's check it out. And this is after we'd seen Evil Dead Rise, which was, of course, the darling of the festival. It was a big, big movie, big Hollywood movie playing at South by. We sat down for Talk to Me, and it just keeps going. It just keeps reinventing the possession genre. It just keeps reinventing what horror can be. And the lights come up, and my friend looks over to me. Again, this was the Evil Dead fan, the number 1 Evil Dead fan, and goes, I think it's the best movie here. I think it's without a doubt the best movie here. And I go, there's no question. This is the best movie, the best horror movie you could see all year long. I think when we did our review of it, which was actually a 2-part review, because we did a pre-spoiler and post-spoiler review, because we got to see it ahead of its actual release, you and I. It was one of 2 movies you and I got to watch together this year. This movie is like Euphoria, the horror movie. And you and I both like Euphoria, the TV show, but it's like you're watching Gen Zers go through horror. So now you and I are, and I said this in our podcast, we're watching the next generation of horror storytellers come out, and that's really exciting. Me as the old fart is excited to see what the new generation can show us for horror. And Talk to Me showed us that you ain't seen nothing yet.
Talk to Me was, in my opinion, the most original horror film of the year. It took a totally different um, direction at a possession film and turned it on its head. You and I talked about this when we did the review, that a big staple of possession films is religion. And I get it, because it's always a demon or a devil possessing. I get it. Whether you're religious or not, that's a big part of it. And you know what? It works in Evil Dead Rise too. I mean, that's a possession where it's an evil spirit inhabiting a body. We get it. Like, that's what possession is. That's what when evil lurks is. Like, they don't really hammer you over the head with religion, but there's still a religious aspect to it, even though that's also a really original take on possession.
Yeah.
Talk to Me does none of that. They're not talking about you being possessed and you need an exorcist or the power of Christ compelling you or any of that. The performances are great, but the originality is what really blew me away in this film. And that's also, going back to last year, one of the reasons I enjoyed Fresh so much, a film that's on Hulu, was it was a little bit comedy, a lot of horror, but something I had never seen before. Something totally different, in my opinion. That's what this film was to me. And you can see, if you can see it right over my shoulder, if you're watching this on YouTube, I have the Talk to Me hand. That should tell you how much I love this movie. When I saw it in July at San Diego Comic-Con, we were in the top row of a theater watching this movie, and we had one of the Philippou brothers, Michael Philippou, sitting 2 seats down from us, which is a bit of a nerve-wracking experience, because you're like, I really hope I like this movie, and I'm not snoring or halfway through the movie. This movie. Like, if David Gordon Green was over there, he would have walked over and punched me. That's like, I know that's what happened in his movies. So it's a little nerve-wracking. We watched it, and I was like, damn. That was a really fun original film. And then when it came, then like 2 weeks later, we were reviewing it again. I saw it in the theater. I went to paid my money to go see it in the theater to support it, watched it again. And then it came out on 4K in October, and I watched it again. Not only does it hold up, this is a film that will end up becoming a comfort movie for me. I will watch this movie over and over and over and over, and I will recite this movie. I will enjoy this movie. Here's how much I enjoyed Talk to Me. You're going to laugh at this one, Patrick. Here's how much I enjoyed Talk to Me. There's a scene early in this film where Mia, the lead character played by Sophie Wilde, is driving with Riley, her best friend's little brother. She goes and picks him up, and she's driving back. And they're screaming a song together in the car, almost like carpool karaoke. And I was like, that's a really catchy song. I didn't know what it was. Now, come to find out, it was a really hugely popular song by
It's a massive pop hit.
by an artist named Sia, and the song's called Chandelier. Now, she's from Australia. They're Australian, the filmmakers, Philippou brothers. I'm a metalhead by all accounts. I'm not saying I don't listen to other music, but by and large, I'm a metalhead. Chances are, if you're going to see me at a Meshuggah concert or In Flames or Motionless in White or Bad Omens, one of my favorite bands, or that, I'm a metalhead, okay? I don't always get outside to hear other stuff. So I had never heard the song Chandelier. It got so infectious in my head, and I had it on replay so much that it actually ended up being one of my top songs on Spotify. Because I listened to it, I was like, this is such a catchy tune. And my girlfriend mocked me relentlessly. She's like, you've never heard of Chandelier? I'm like, no.
It's a massive hit.
I had no idea what this was. And so it ended up being like my top 20 songs on Spotify this year because I'd never heard it. And I listened to it a bunch because it's in Talk to Me. It's such a catchy tune in Talk to Me. This film is a home run on every single level. It is well acted. It is well written. It is wholly original. It goes hard. And I said at the time we did interview the filmmakers on this podcast, just to be clear and open about it.
And they did not pay us. Nobody paid us to talk about this movie.
Not at all. We actually were like, oh shit, we better, we were like, oh man, I hope this ends up being like a movie we can talk about positively because we're going to have these guys on the show. Ended up, we loved it. But this is a film that made me immediately not only fans of this film made me a fan of the filmmakers, the Philippou brothers. I'm like, I'll see anything they do next.
Mm-hmm.
There is going to be a sequel called Talk to Me, which I love. That was a suggestion actually passed out at San Diego Comic-Con. We were in the panel with the Philippou brothers, and someone on the microphone was like, I have a title for your film. How about Talk to the number 2, Me? And they're like, oh shit. Then they announced it, and that's actually going to be the title, Talk to Me. This film was great. It just everything. It was dramatic. It was well acted. It was original. Great script. Great performances. Great execution. From top to bottom, this was an A+ film.
Great. And it actually the other song from the movie from the montage became a viral hit. It's it's on everything, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. Everybody's using that song, and it came from that movie. So you've heard the song, and if you've never watched the movie, you know the song from the movie because it literally plays in everything.
We didn't nail down, we didn't get into specifics of favorite everything in this year. If I had a favorite scene of 2023, it would be the montage scene from Talk.
Yeah, it's great. And it's just kids having fun, by the way.
Yeah. They're getting possessed and being goofy. And I mentioned that to the Philippou brothers when we had them on the show. I said, that was my favorite scene. I loved that scene, that montage scene, which was actually one of the more difficult shots they had that scene because their director of photography said, there's no way we can do this. And
their assistant director, I think they had 80 shots to get done in one night, and they go, it's mathematically impossible. Philippou brothers said, just give us the set and we will figure it out, because they've been on YouTube for years making their little movies, and they're like, we have this in our heads, just let us do this, we'll get it done in 6 hours. They got 80 shots done in 6 or 8 hours or however long it took, and it is one of the most memorable parts of the whole movie.
They're like, just let us cook, man, let us cook. And boy, did they cook. It was pure fire. That film, like I said, when I rate my top films of 2023, which is different from horror, I still think Talk to Me is going to be right there at the top. It is such a fun, original movie. And the more I watch it, the more I enjoy it. And I can't wait. I can't wait for the sequel. I can't wait to see what they do next. I can't wait to see Street Fighter. They're doing a Street Fighter movie.
Way into that.
Yeah, I'm all about it. But this was, again, I think everyone who listens to this podcast has probably seen Talk to Me, I'd imagine at this point. If you haven't, run, do not walk. It is an amazing, amazing piece of filmmaking. I would highly recommend it. And it's number 1 for both you and I, which says a lot.
Yeah. It was a universal number 1 this year because it subverted everything, Damon. The final girl isn't who you think it's going to be. And is there even really a final girl? There's the question to there. They don't run to institutions during this. They are kids who figure it out on their own. They're kids who have fun with it on their own. They get high on their supply. It's a great entry into new ways to show horror. And all the old guard should take note. This is where the future of horror is going. So pay attention. And you don't have to love it. That's not the rule. Just because it's our number 1, you don't have to love it. But you have to see where horror is going. And I like the shape that it's taking. Talk to Me showed this is where horror is going to start going, because there's a whole new generation of filmmakers and storytellers out there. The future looks bright, Damon. The future for horror looks very bright, and it's because of Talk to Me.
And this was the year of possession. We mentioned that earlier. It really was. There's a lot of good possession. Even like I said, we both were surprised the Pope's Exorcist was even a modicum of decency, and it was like, wow, that was actually pretty decent. But again, going back to the whole religious aspect, there's none of that. They totally flipped this genre on its head and gave you something you never saw coming.
Yeah, fucking loved it, dude. Still, just what a great movie.
Yeah. Let's mention a couple of our honorable mentions here. Let's talk. I don't want to go down a big list. Let's just mention a few of these, and I'll start because obviously I mentioned, of course, When Evil Lurks is on my list. That could have easily been number 5, and I'll be
shocked it wasn't.
I'll be completely honest. that one kind of broke my heart to leave it off the list. I mostly switched it because again, I honestly I went into When Evil Lurks thinking I'm probably gonna enjoy this. I just don't know how hard it's gonna go. I did go into Infinity Pool thinking I'm probably not gonna like this, and then walked out loving it. So again, that's kind of why it slipped into number 5 over When Evil Lurks. I also have to mention Saw X was a movie that didn't make my top 5, but I totally, again, it was my biggest surprise of the year. Again, not a huge Saw fan. The fact that I really enjoyed this Saw movie, put it in my top 3 Saw movies, says a lot about how well done this movie is. I also want to mention a movie by the name of Totally Killer, which we did a 2-part, we did a double feature review with that and Five Nights at Freddy's earlier this year. Five Nights at Freddy's sucked like a Dyson, but Totally Killer was a really fun, original, goofy horror comedy that was just so much fun, didn't take itself too seriously. And again, no spoiler, they deal with time travel in that movie. And one of my biggest praises for Totally Killer was they don't beat you over the head with technique. Like, how's this work? Why does this work? How does, no, we're just time traveling. It's Hot Tub Time Machine. We're just going back in time. Fuck it. We don't care how we got there. We're just going to get there.
Yeah.
I love the simplicity of that, and the performances in that movie were great as well. So I want to also give a shout out to Totally Killer. How about you? What are your and one other honorable mention I want to throw out there: a movie by the name of Suitable Flesh, which is a movie that stars Heather Graham and, of course, one of my favorite all-time scream queens, the great Barbara Crampton. It felt, I'll tell you, the Suitable Flesh. It's not the same, but it felt like Stuart Gordon, who of course the animator from Beyond, that kind of movie, if him and oh my god, why am I blanking on the guy's name? The guy who made he made Scarface is his bit.
De Palma, yeah.
Brian De Palma, thank you. Brian De Palma, Scarface is a bad example. He made Dress to Kill, lots of movies like Carrie.
Much better movies than Scarface.
Yeah. Brian De Palma and Stuart Gordon got together and made a movie. That's what Suitable Flesh is. It's a body horror. It's a twist on your head movie. It's erotic. Heather Graham's in it. Barbara Crampton. Really solid movie, and that also deserves to be in my honorable mentions list.
Nice. I do need to see that one. I still haven't gotten a chance to see it. So some of the other movies on my honorable mention, you mentioned some of them. Infinity Pool's definitely on there. It could have easily hit the top 5 this year. Saw X, Totally Killer. Those are movies that could have made the top 5 this year. Cocaine Bear, sort of a horror, kind of a comedy, but like really funny and really fun. Like, I had way more fun with Cocaine Bear than I thought I was going to have this year. Scream 6, I thought was fantastic. Megan, by the way, like Megan was like, I think our first horror movie of the year, and it still stuck with me. Like how much fun I had watching that movie. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect, but it was damn entertaining. So, you know, like that's kind of my honorable mentions list. I think we have a lot of the same stuff in there.
Yeah, I also want to throw out a spec. Again, it didn't reach it wasn't like a top movie this year, but a movie that really did surprise me. A movie called Brooklyn 4-5, which we reviewed from Shutter.
Yes.
That one didn't see coming. Honestly, was like, oh God, this just it's not going to be good. And it was actually really solid. I was like, damn, that was a pretty fun movie. Like, really pretty well done movie. So, another one to throw out there as well. So, yeah, lots of honorable mentions. There's our top 5. We have one last category to get to, Patrick, and this is the one that will roll us into 2024, and that is our most anticipated movies of 2024. Are we doing 2 again this year? We did 2 last year. Do we need to do 2 this year?
I'll do 2, yeah.
What are your most anticipated horror films coming up in 2024?
Well, right off the top is Nosferatu with Robert Eggers. You and I both love Robert Eggers films. He had The Northman out this past year that was pretty fucking rad. Not a horror movie at all, just a rad fucking movie. The Witch, The Lighthouse, which I really liked. Some of these movies aren't necessarily horror, but Nosferatu is going to be a vampire film with Robert Eggers, who has a fantastic track record. I'm very, very excited to see what this movie is all about, because it's Robert Eggers and it's horror and it's a very classic tale of the vampire. We know he loves to do period piece stuff, so I think it's going to kick much ass. And then my really number one most anticipated film for 2024 is Alien Romulus, which is Fede Alvarez's take on the Alien franchise. Now, we just talked a little bit today about Evil Dead, his 2013 remake. We called it one of the best remakes in all of horror history. It goes so hard. It's so nasty. It's so evil. It's so vile. I think giving Fede the keys to the Alien franchise is a good call. And it's I know it's not telling the Ripley story. It's going to be with other people. I have very high expectations for this movie, which we know is dangerous, but it's in good hands. Fede Alvarez delivers. He really does every time out. I fail to find a movie where I go, wow, Fede, where he's the director, where I said that wasn't that good. He's a very good director.
Yeah, so I'm glad you put that on there because it was originally going to be on mine for Alien Romulus, but I said, I bet you Patrick's going to put it on his. So I'm going to let it go and not put it on mine only for that reason. And here's why. Because my other most anticipated movie for 2024 is Nosferatu. Robert Eggers is starting to slip into that unmissable category to where everything he's done has been so good that it kind of scares me a little bit. I've only had one director in my entire life that has yet to ever have a miss in my eyes, and that's Quentin Tarantino, my favorite director. 9 films in, technically 10 if you want to count Kill Bill, depending on how you do it. He's yet to make a bad film in my eyes, and I would say 5 or 6 of Tarantino's films are like top 25 for me all time. I always get a little scared by that because every director has Martin Scorsese has misses. You know what I mean? Like there are misses in the Martin Scorsese catalog. Robert Eggers hasn't had one yet. I'm not the biggest fan of The Lighthouse, but I enjoyed it. It's just a film that I don't really think I'll revisit. The Witch is a classic. Love that movie. I just rewatched The Northman the other night. I love that movie.
It's a great movie.
I am so excited for Nosferatu. And the scary thing about that film is it doesn't come out till December 24th of next year. So we're going to have to do our best of late.
Thanks, Robert.
Yeah, because that's literally coming out the last week of the year. I am so excited for Nosferatu. I can't wait for that film. So that's on my list as well. Alien Romulus was going to be on my list, but I'm glad I left it off solely because I had a feeling you'd go that route, and I'm cautiously optimistic because I love Fede Alvarez. I love what he did with Evil Dead. This film supposedly takes place between the events of Alien and Aliens, which leaves me a little worried how that's going to work with the aliens and LV-426. I don't know how that's going to all play out. We'll see, but I do have faith in the filmmaker. Good cast. I am infinitely curious. There's also a TV show coming out from Noah Hawley, who did the Fargo series, who's great. Also did Legion, which
I love Legion. Yeah,
he's doing that TV show, which has Timothy Olyphant and a great cast in there. So I'm curious about that one as well. That's another Alien franchise take. So yeah, super excited. But my other film that I want to mention, I don't think it's a total shock here. My other most anticipated film of 2024 is Terrifier 3. I am super excited to see what Damien Leone follows up with Terrifier 2. He's bringing back the entire cast. Of course, the great Lauren Lavera, who I absolutely adore. I can't wait to see what she does with this film. It scares me a little bit, which is also why it's on my most anticipated list, because he said he's taking it back to more of a Terrifier 1 feel. And if you listen to our Terrifier review with our friend Sid from Horror Chronicles on TikTok and our own Hello Sydney podcast, I said that I like Terrifier 2 more than Terrifier. Terrifier was fun. Terrifier 2 actually had a story to it, and I really enjoyed it. A little scared, to be honest, about Terrifier 3. Also set at Christmas. That's a little worrisome. I don't know how that's going to play, but that also makes it exciting for me. And so that's why it's my other most anticipated film coming into 2024. So my two, Nosferatu, Terrifier 2. Or Terrifier 3, excuse me.
I have very high expectations for Terrifier 3. I think it's going to be my favorite of the franchise. That's my bold prediction, is that I will love it. And I like the other two movies just fine. But I think it's like Damien has found the sweet spot with what he's describing with Terrifier 3. So I'm very, very eager to see how that goes. I haven't even watched the trailer, Damon, which I know sounds sacrilege, but you know why. You know me. When I don't watch trailers, it's because I don't want to know. I want to go on the ride. And I went in blind for Terrifier and Terrifier 2 on purpose. I'm sticking to that for Terrifier 3. I can't wait for them to shock me one more time. That's exciting. Damon, there's plenty of other stuff to anticipate in 2024. The Crow is coming back. Okay.
That's another one that scares me. I love the Crow. You can't see it on my wall here. I have action figures and posters. I am a huge Crow fan. When I was a pro wrestler back in my day, my name as a pro wrestler was Damian Draven, which was a take on Eric Draven from The Crow. Loved The Crow. Terrified of what this movie's going to be.
But it's got Bill Skarsgård, and we know he's good.
He is good, but they've tried to do this a lot, and no one's been able to pull it off. So I really am hoping for the best, though. That was also on my short list, but I'm like, God, I don't know, man. Like, this has not worked out well for anybody else doing it, so we'll see.
There's also A Quiet Place Day One, and you know why I'm excited about that movie. It's the director of Pig, which was my favorite film of 2019, starring Nicolas Cage. He's directing a new Quiet Place offshoot movie that has nothing to do with the original characters. I'm excited to check that out. There's also a lesser known movie coming out that I think you and I and most horror fans should at least keep our ear out for, and that's Witchboard, because it's directed by Chuck Russell. And if that name doesn't immediately jump out to most fans, you definitely have seen his work. He is the director of Damon's favorite Nightmare on Elm Street, Dream Warriors. That Chuck Russell directed Dream Warriors. Chuck Russell also directed 1988's The Blob, which is a fucking definitive Blob. Like, it's the best Blob. It's an incredible. And I got to see a little teaser of it at Comic-Con. I went to a panel that he was on, and he showed it, and I was like, yeah, I can see the potential in this. It's going to be a lower budget movie. It's not going to exist on the level of the big movies like Alien and A Quiet Place and Nosferatu, but it should be on every horror fanatic's watch list. So watch out for Witchboard. That's coming.
Yeah, there's a lot of good films, like I said, and there's going to be more. You know, I didn't see Talk to Me coming until it happened, and then it became my favorite film of the year. So there's going to be a lot of films that come out next year that are going to be exciting. It's going to be a great year, I'm sure. Even though we kind of talked about there's some mediocrity a little bit in horror in 2023, we still, at least for me personally, I found what is, I think, going to be an iconic horror film that's going to stick on like my all-time list with Talk to Me. My favorite franchise, Scream, had a new film. So again, even on a somewhat weird year where there weren't as many films that just totally blew me away, I still was blown away by films. The Infinity Pool, I mentioned, all my top 5, every film in there kind of stunned me in some way or form or fashion. And I'm super excited to see what comes in 2024. We got lots more coming, Patrick. We got a big year ahead. I think our first new film of 2024 will be the new film called Night Swim. That comes out in early January. That is a Blumhouse film. That will be, much like our Megan from last year, that will be our first new film of 2024. So that's coming soon. It's nonstop, though. There's always going to be films coming. We're going to have plenty of classics next year. We're going to have plenty of new films. Cannot wait for another year of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thank you to everybody that tunes in and does these best of shows. These kind of turned into some epic episodes over the years. They kind of started out as like, ooh, let's do a quick little half-hour best of, and now we're 2.5 hours in talking about our favorite 5 horror films and all the performances and gore and kills and David Gordon Green pissing me off.
Can David Gordon Green make it 3 for 3 and piss you off next year too? What's he doing?
Can he do something else? Just do a different genre, and then I don't have to worry about it on this podcast. People don't be like, oh, is he talking about David Gordon Green again? God damn, let it go, Damon.
And Damon, should we tease? This whole year has been devoid of us focusing on one franchise. Last year we focused solely on Nightmare on Elm Street. It was a fantastic franchise breakdown that we did throughout the year. We're going to kick the year off with some franchise talk, Damon.
Yes, we
Shall we explain?
Please explain, because I know this is your number one film of all time?
My number one film of all time, of all film, of all everything, is Alien. And we are going to cover the Alien franchise. We are not doing Alien versus Predator, so shut the fuck up. I don't want to hear about it. If anybody complains we don't do Alien versus Predator, we're not doing that. But we are covering the rest of the Alien franchises, and that includes Prometheus. That includes what the fuck is the other one? Covenant. Yeah, Alien Covenant. We're going all the way. We're going to go all the way through the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's a lot of good in there though, and we're going to kick it off with Alien early in the year. That'll be our next coverage for franchises.
And that is 6 films deep, if I'm not mistaken, correct? It's Alien, Aliens, Alien 3, Alien Resurrection, Prometheus, and Alien Covenant, correct?
That's right. That'll be 6 films.
And then we'll talk about Alien versus Predator and Alien versus Predator 2, because I know no,
I don't think we'll be talking about those. And I mean, maybe we can time it for the release of Alien Romulus. I'm not sure when it comes out, but we'll try and time it to maybe get right around there. And so it feels complete.
Well, that will be our franchise to kick things off in 2024. We are going to be talking about the entire Alien franchise, all 6 of those films. And it's going to be a lot of fun because I'll begin, not to bury the lead here. I love Alien. I would say Aliens is one of my top 5, 6 movies ever. Love Alien too, by the way. Just saying, throwing that out there. But Aliens might be one of my top 5, 6 films ever. I love that movie. I literally could quote that. We could do if they lost the screenplay of this movie, you could you would write it for us. Like, sure, why not?
I'll be Sergeant Apone.
Yeah.
I love that guy. He's my favorite. We don't need to start talking it now because we won't ever get off this goddamn podcast.
Game over, man. Game over. That's going to be our franchise in 2024. We're going to talk about the entire Alien franchise. It's going to be a blast. A sincere thank you to everyone that tunes into the show, that listens to these episodes, has a blast with us. Our podcast has done incredible numbers this year. We blew up on Spotify, blew up a lot of places. Cannot say thank you enough to our loyal listeners. We have a lot of people who tune in regularly and every single episode. Cannot say thank you enough for putting up with us and enjoying horror along with us. We appreciate that. We have so much more to come in 2024 and beyond, so do not think this is like a goodbye. This is just saying goodbye to 2023. A thank you to everyone that tunes in. As always, as I close out the show, I will say if you do have questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, we always love hearing from you guys. We get a ton of messages on Instagram and other places. Feel free to send us a message on social media. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead. Or if you want to send us an email, we'd love to hear from you there as well. You can send it at rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. You can also find us on all of your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and of course, we're still building up our YouTube channel, so just search out Rewind of the Living Dead on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel. That really does make a difference. Even if you watch every episode, we appreciate if you subscribe also. We appreciate it. We don't bombard you with emails or anything like that. We upload 1 episode per week. That's it. So enjoy Rewind of the Living Dead for YouTube as well. And you can also find us on our own personal social media channels. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And Patrick, I want to give you the chance here as we close out 2023, as I've been a blowhard here talking for the last 2 minutes. Anything you'd like to say to the people out there supporting us for another year?
Ladies and gentlemen, and everybody in between, we love you. We appreciate you. I love getting all the comments. There's people commenting all over our platforms everywhere that we are. We love you. We see you. We hear you. Keep interacting with us. That keeps the flame going. That so we know that we're not just blabbing into the void, because boy could we. Let me tell you something. Damon and I can do this all day, and we do it all day. So we really appreciate hearing from all of you. That means the world to us. Even the negative comments. We're getting to the point where there's enough people to know us that we get negative comments now. That's fine too. I'm happy that people are listening and engaged. It makes this a great experience for me. I really enjoy it. So thank you to everyone who tunes in.
Absolutely. And thank you to everyone. As always, we will see you in the new year in 2024. Thanks so much for tuning in to Rewind of the Living Dead. We will see you guys soon. Thanks for tuning in.
Peace.